Right, I will call our session here to order. This is the resumption of the December 10th hearing, which was adjourned due to our running out of time with the boardroom. On that date, we will carry on with items 2 through 9, having only covered number 1. I'll begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. With me on the panel today, again, as it was on December 10th, is Robert Buss and Brent McIntyre. The assessor on the previous occasion was Jeremy Pohl, but today it is Lindsay Wareham. Sorry, trying to remember your mum's maiden name, or not maiden, married name. The secretary today is Michelle, and we had Kara previously, right? So is she the one of record, or are you going to be? You'll figure that out. All right. We'll be hearing applications for a revision of the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised the comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions and the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. If you've not already done so, please put your phones on silent. We do permit the use of phones with the permission of the chair if it is for presentation of evidence. Could we have the swearing in, please?
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing true, so help you God? Can you state your full name, please?
Trevor Smith.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing true, so help you God?
I do.
So item number 2 on our docket is unit number 75 at 3965 Portage Avenue. Ms. Wareham, when you are ready, could you proceed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're looking at file number 19-637, roll number 07569034000. As stated, this is 75-3965 Portage Avenue. This is a complete auto dealership in the Point West Auto Mall, and it is the Birchwood Honda West dealer. I'm recommending to maintain the assessed value for 2020 of $4,243,000. As stated, this is a complete auto dealer with an effective year built of 1999 to 2009. We have a leasable area of 24,159 square feet. If you turn to page 2, you'll see the mailer for the subject property. If you turn to page 3, you'll see the comparables. Auto dealerships typically are owner-occupied properties, so they typically don't have leases on them. So when you don't have leases to look at what's happening in the market, you have to look at similar properties that may not be the exact same. The most similar property is big box retail. Big box retail is essentially a steel building, slab on grade, that sells something in the front, warehouse type storage space in the back, similar to the auto dealers. So when you're looking at the comparables on page 3, we have an average of $18.86 with a median of $18.29. There's a range there, although it is a pretty tight range. And this is a variety of retail throughout the city. If you look at the bottom, these are auto comparables. They have an average of $17.54 with a median of $16.25. They range from $12.50 a square foot to $25.16 a square foot. And these are the very few car dealership auto-related leases that we have for vehicle dealerships. If you turn to page 4, you'll see the income valuation summary for the subject property. There's 24,159 square feet, as previously stated. We have a modeled rent of $13.20. We have a 2% vacancy on this property. We have 2% expenses and an overall cap rate of 7.15% for an estimated market value of $4,243,000. When you're looking at the income stream, you'll note that the vacancy is 2%. Vacancy is typically low in these types of properties. Car dealerships you don't see vacant car dealerships a lot. And when you're looking at the vacancy for it, we reflect that in the 2%. Our expenses are at 2%. As previously has probably been heard in previous hearings, we take a fresh look at properties every reassessment, and in 2020 we have a fresh look. We use 2% for our non-recoverable expenses, and if you turn to page 31 of the brief, you'll look at our non-recoverable expense sampling, and that's where that 2% comes from. So we look at a range of properties for the non-recoverable expenses, and we have a median of 1.06%, which is well in line with the 2% that has been applied. Our cap rate of 7.15%, if you look at the cap rate information on page 6, you'll see our ranges of cap rates. You'll note that 7.15% typically falls within the retail cap rates, as we are reflecting that these properties are typically retail. If you look on page 9, there's a chart of 6 car dealerships, and these are direct sales of car dealerships that have sold. And they have a sale price per square foot that ranges from $161.79 to $375 a square foot. The subject property has a per square foot rate of $168.88, which falls within that range. If you look on page 10, you'll see maps of the direct sales of the properties. And again, if you turn to page 30, these are a sampling of cap rates. These are verified sales that our department has looked at. And if you look at the retail cap rates, they're ranging from 3.1% upwards of 7.4%, well within the range of our 7.15%. It's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Smith.
Yes, so just, I guess, as a preamble, we have a number of properties all in the same location here today, so I will have a number of questions, but we'll ask them once if everybody's in agreement with that, and that can carry forward unless there's specifics that need to be asked with regard to particular properties. Just to begin with, the briefs that are prepared here today, this was not specifically done by yourself, correct? You're standing in for a different assessor today?
That is correct.
Okay. So I will keep that in mind in the questions that I ask with regard to the information that's contained, but there are questions that I do have to ask, of course. So. Looking at let's start, I guess, with page number, perhaps just go through it in order, page number 3.
Okay.
So we have the rental comparables that have been presented by the city. So the first 27 that are shown here, these are retail comparables, correct?
Yes, they're big box retail.
Okay, so these are all big box retail, and forgive me, Mr. Chair, may I use my phone? I have a picture of this with identifying material on it that I forgot to bring with me in my large box of material.
Is that something you're going to show us, or just
no? It's just
printing it yourself?
it's nothing to show, it just identifies who the tenants are.
Is that acceptable?
If he wants to go through the list of tenants, he can.
I don't want to go through it extensively, but it's a general commentary,
Okay.
if that's fine. So, the locations here, and I'm just looking in general, we have the Regent Power Center strip. We have, call it the Polo Park area Power Center strip. We have the area around IKEA and Sterling Lion. I'm not sure if Keniston Power Center is in here. Those would be the locations of these particular retail big boxes. Is that correct?
They are, and the reason that we choose retail big boxes that are in power centers because we feel that they're the most comparable to auto dealerships that are in an auto mall. To us, an auto mall is essentially a power center for vehicles, to sell vehicles, to be in the vehicle industry. So that's why we've chosen big box retail in power centers, because that, in the city's opinion, is what is the most comparable to an auto mall, sort of the concept of what an auto mall is. It's very similar to a power center, so that's why.
Okay, just to that point then, and having sat in on the rather lengthy last presentation regarding the initial property on this docket today, it was stated that the reason for selection of the retail big box was essentially the similarity in structure, that they were steel structures, pad on grade, etc. That was kind of the driving force that was identified as.
All of those things are.
Okay. Now, the zoning for these, and I did go through not all of them, but I did a quick check. Generally, we're looking at a C4 zoning here. That's correct?
I wouldn't be able to speak to the zoning of the comparables.
Okay.
Or are you speaking in with respect to the subject property?
No, well, in relation to the subject property. So I did, and forgive me, I didn't go through all 27 and write them down, but I went through quite a number, and it appeared that they were all a higher level of zoning at C4, which would be a more permissive use, correct?
Again, I don't have any evidence of the zoning in front of me to be able to speak with a very determined amount to it. So again, I haven't looked at the zoning of these comparables. I don't have the zoning bylaw in front of me with the definitions, so I can't really speak
And that's
with
fair.
authority.
Certainly fair. If, assuming that these are C4 and the subject is a lower classification of zoning at C3, I believe, commercial corridor with some additional impacts on it as well, that would have an impact as to what could be developed on site, correct?
Possibly, yes.
Okay. Just for information's sake, the type of tenancies that we would be looking at here would be of the national brand scale, so we'd be looking at Old Navy, Mark's Work Warehouse, Bouclair, Staples, Giant Tiger, large-scale theaters, Hudson Bay Home, things of that nature. Is that fair to say?
Yep.
Okay. Now, in terms of big box retail, they are built at major nodes of travel with proximity to large population centers, and they're built together as not new format, but newer format retail where people can do all of their shopping in one location. Is that correct? Of all the different types?
Yep.
Okay. Those would be my questions, I believe, for the moment anyway, on the rental comparables. In terms of those particular leases for the retail ones. Moving to the bottom of that page, 1284 Main Street. That would be MPI who is the tenant there, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, yeah, it is MPI. Would you be in agreement that that was a build to suit for the tenant itself?
I wouldn't be able to speak to how
Okay.
they arrived there. I hadn't looked into it further, but other than knowing that it was.
Fair enough. So we did some research on it, obviously, and it was a build to suit. There was a hearing just earlier this week, and I recognize that you're here at the last minute, so you haven't had the opportunity to review all this material. A different assessor also on automotive dealers with the same rental comparables presented was aware that 1284 Main Street was a build to suit with significant basement space and was largely composed of office. It does have obviously assessing area, which is relatively large as well, but had a very significant office space and indicated that didn't feel it was particularly comparable. I know it's difficult to speak to that. Is that information that you have?
I am not aware of any
Fair
of that
enough.
information. My apologies.
Not a problem. Again, these are questions I have to ask. So, the second automotive comparable at the bottom there, 3570 Portage Avenue, that's a Boyd location, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay, and as has been mentioned in prior hearings, not with yourself, this is the Boyd head office location and is comprised mostly of office space. Is that information you
I
have?
don't know that. I'm sorry.
And that's
just know
fair.
that it's
I feel badly about how you have to ask these questions.
No.
If everybody can just keep that in mind,
Oh.
I asked them, I'm not trying to make Lindsay look
No,
bad.
no.
Just questions, all right?
It's all understandable.
All right.
It's refreshing
So-
to hear her say, I don't know.
So, to my knowledge, there's only two small retail or two small detail bays there, and the remainder of the space is office space. Would that be particularly good comparable in relation to the subject properties today?
I
If it
think-
were mainly office.
I think when we're talking about what's comparable and to be able to answer that question, I think as I stated in my presentation, because auto dealerships typically are owner occupied, you have to look at other things. So they may not be perfectly comparable, but they're the closest that we can get, which is why it's been presented here this way. We've shown what the big box retail is. They do have some things that are slightly superior to auto dealers. Again, as stated, the rate is $18. I believe we're using $13.20 on the subject property, so we are recognizing that there are some things that are different in big box retail with respect to the storage space. And then what we were also trying to do is we were showing the few auto comparables that we do have. Typically in a car dealership, yes, there is more showroom space, there is some office space, but typically more office space is slightly different. But what we were trying to do is to show the closest comparables of what were actual leases. So I recognize that if something is comprised mostly of office with only a couple bays, that may not be exact, but it's the closest comparable that we get in lieu of having auto dealerships that have leases on them when they're owner occupied. So that's why they're presented here today.
Right, and that, I certainly understand what you're saying there. Sorry, just a moment. The third comparable there, 3680 Portage Avenue. That's a used car dealer at this point, Auto Gallery, I believe it is.
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay, and that building does have a mezzanine space, correct?
I can't speak to what
Right.
type of space it has in it.
Okay, now, having been there and seen the mezzanine space, the area that the city has for the leased area that they're showing here is 7,200 square feet. I guess you could call it rebuttal information, showing that that's only taking into account the main floor area and not the mezzanine space. Can I pass that out at this time?
You might as well, since we're talking about it at this point.
You don't want to do things twice. So I'm not sure if you have enough copies there, but hopefully it covers it.
It's okay, I drank all the water.
Thank you.
So we're going to be using this for,
Yeah, it's the same material for all of the.
okay.
So if you go through, this is the property attribute information available online from Assessment and Taxation Department for all properties. So if you go through the math here of the ground floor areas, it does add up to 7,200 square feet. So it doesn't actually take into account the mezzanine space. So if that were the case, if that space were added on, that would change the net rental rate in a downwards direction, correct?
If, in fact, the ground floor area that's recognized here doesn't consider the mezzanine space, because this would come from the way we input our records into the system, and without having the information in front of me to see where that mezzanine space is attributed, it very well could be attributed to these spaces. And I do know that when we do put areas and net rents together, a lot of the time we are using what's reported to us on the mailer.
Okay, I have, just with regard to this particular property, I have seen the leasable area for realty and business shown as a larger area, so
Okay.
it's my assumption that the
Okay.
mezzanine area is not included in that 7,200, and that's why I wanted
Okay.
to present that particular information. So if the mezzanine area were not included, that would drive down the rental rate on that somewhat as well, correct?
Correct. If that's,
Okay.
yeah.
The 2537 Pembina Highway lease that is shown there, this is the former Subaru dealership that was located at 2537 Pembina?
Correct.
Okay. And the city is aware of the background with regard to the lease, purchase, transfer of business at that location?
Can you elaborate on that when you say transfer of business?
So it's a complicated one, and again,
Okay.
doing this in the method where we have to ask questions makes these
Feel free
exceptionally
to
difficult.
provide some information.
All right.
Well, I can answer what I know if you want then, and then
Sure.
he can elaborate. So what I know on that property, in speaking with Mr. Pohl, he did some extensive research with regard to that sale. I believe he did talk to the real estate manager. He indicated that they were the tenant in place at the time of the lease. When they signed the lease, they had an option to purchase. At the time that they signed the lease, the option to purchase and the intent to purchase, I think, and the purchase price possibly was agreed upon at the time that the lease was entered into, and they did exercise that option to purchase. And I do know Mr. Pohl did go to a significant amount of research with respect to these direct sales that he used, including that specific one. And I believe that is all the information I have on that particular one.
Okay, so I will probably speak to that property perhaps a bit more in my presentation. I guess a follow-up question would be that is the city aware that at the time that the initial lease and the initial agreement for a future purchase price was struck, that the new tenant, so to speak, was intending to move that facility to the Waverly Auto Mall at that point in time.
I am not aware of that.
Okay. And just as a corollary, the existing brand at 2537 Pembina prior to the lease start date and after the lease start date was Subaru, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. I do know that it was, so I know that, again, you're here at the last minute, so that is fine. So my general comments, I guess, or questions with regard to the automotive leases that are shown are with regard to the comparability, or not admissibility so much, but the nature of the lease and whether it's a valid comparison or not is what is being asked. Let's move on, I guess. We have a lot of material to cover here, and as you saw when I walked in, I have a number of documents that I have to pass out, and I have to remember when we arrive at those particular points. So let's look at page number 4, perhaps. And the vehicle dealership workup. So you had noted with regard to the vacancy, I guess the comment was that you don't see a lot of vacant auto dealers. I think that's what you had mentioned.
I haven't, no.
Okay. Is the city aware of any dealers that have gone dark over, say, a business cycle kind of time frame within the city, where brands were consolidated, etc., dealership footprints were shrunk, where there were multiple dealers, they were shrunk down to a single dealer, etc.?
I wouldn't be able to speak to the shrinking down of dealers, but I have seen multiple dealerships that have 2 different brands in them, yes.
So going back to the 2007, 2010 kind of time frame, the city's aware that Chevrolet, General Motors, etc., ran into significant financial troubles, I imagine.
I wouldn't be able to speak to that.
And I recognize that, so I'm kind of making my own comments, I suppose. But at that time frame, they were the brands were required to shrink their retail footprints, and so they withdrew a number of dealerships within each market that they were present in, and consolidated from multiple dealers down to single or lesser dealers within the Winnipeg market. And just to that note, I will keep the rest of my comments with regard to vacancy perhaps to my presentation as well, just for clarity's sake, because I don't want to question you on information that hasn't been presented, etc. The expenses that the city is allowing here, we've all spent a lot of time on this, obviously, over time. I see that the city is using 2%. Is that consistent with what has been done for auto dealerships in the city in the past?
We're doing a reassessment, and we do a reassessment cycle every 2 years, and based on the data that we have, 2% is what we're using consistently for the 2020 reassessment cycle.
Okay, and that is intended to be inclusive of all expenses that an owner would face. Is that correct?
We have always used 2% for non-recoverable expenses in this cycle and previous cycles.
So I am going to ask, I guess, for further explanation then. It's my understanding that in past cycles, going back into the last decade, well into the last decade, the city had two allowances. One of them was termed 5% for what was termed management. The other was termed 2% for other. Neither of them was specifically called non-recoverable at that time. Can you provide, I guess, further detail to the board what the differences between the two were?
To my knowledge and the information that I have reviewed and our department has, is the 2% other was always a non-recoverable expense. We still have that 2%. We now call it non-recoverable expense to make it more clear because it has created quite a bit of confusion calling it 2% other. The 5% was not a non-recoverable expense. It was a management expense. It was purely for management. And we noticed when we reviewed our data for the 2020 reassessment, looking at 2017 and reference date of April 1st, 2018, that management is typically recovered from property owners, and so our net rents, the $13.20 that we use, are already net of the 5% management expense, so there was no need to add that back again because we've already included that in our net rent. So the 2% that we previously called other is still 2%, and it's for non-recoverable expenses, and that's what that 2% always was covering. It just apparently was called other, and we're now making it more clear. But the 5% was a management expense, typically from, like I said, the mailers that we reviewed. That management expense is always being recovered, and our rents are reflective of that, and those are net of that 5% management. So our non-recoverable expenses is 2%.
So, in listening to you, then it's the city's contention that the 5% that was allowed was specifically for recovery of property management from tenants.
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. And I'm assuming that the city would have gone back in time and looked at leases that would have been struck in the 2000s and prior, et cetera, with regard to property management. Is that correct?
I don't think we would have gone back to prior to 2000 because we're looking at a reference date of April 1st, 2018.
Okay. Perhaps I've overstated it in saying 2000. Did the city go back to any prior time frames to look at whether property management was typically recovered under leases?
We would have looked at the applicable market information for the reference date of April 1st, 2018.
Okay. Is the city aware that property management has always been recovered as a typical recovery under standard lease terms in commercial properties in the Winnipeg market, and that has not changed from prior cycles to the current cycle?
I can't speak to that.
Okay. So, and again, this is again more of a commentary with regard to the city's modeling then, and perhaps the plausibility of it than obviously the individual assessor sitting here today. But that, if that were correct, would that not then suggest that the city has made a 5% error on all commercial assessments over the time frame in which that model was in place, so going back perhaps 20 years?
I can't speak to that.
Okay, then that's fine. I certainly understand. I do have rebuttal information, obviously, on the non-recoverable issue. Can we pass that out at this point, or how would you like to do that, Mr. Chairman?
Why don't we deal with that when we are dealing with your presentation?
With my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm assuming you're going to want to readdress the topic at that point, or would you rather deal with it right now and not deal with it later?
I will be readdressing it at that point, yes. Forgive me, make sure I've... here. Again, still on page number 4. Looking at the capitalization rate that's been applied to the dealerships here today of 7.15%. There's been no arm's length dealership transactions with in-place leases where we could truly identify a cap rate in the relevant time frame or in the recent past. Has there been?
To my knowledge, I'm not quite sure. In the brief, I don't have any of that information, no.
Okay. And the capitalization rate that was used in the 2018 cycle by the city was 7.5%. I see that we're now at 7.15%. There wouldn't be any specific information pointing to a drop in cap rates if there had been no transactions, correct?
I don't know what the 2018 cap rate for vehicle dealerships was, and I can't really speak to the change. We're in a new reassessment cycle, and we're talking about 2020.
Okay. Moving on, then, looking at the retail cap or the capitalization rate chart that the city usually has. It's shown on page number 6 here. Obviously, there's no automotive related sector that's identifiable. Is there a sector that the city is specifically looking at in relation to these automotive properties in identifying an appropriate cap rate?
When looking at them, we try to look at what's happening with the cap rates, and like I said, we typically look at these similar to retail. Again, when you look at what's presented on this chart, it doesn't hit every single property type. We all know that there's a whole bunch of different property types, and what we have presented is just showing how our model comes in line with property types that are reviewed from other properties. We typically look at these as retail. They're not industrial properties. These are more akin to retail properties, so I would lean more on retail cap rates, as I said in my presentation.
Would the entire buildings be more akin to retail in terms of their layout, design, operation, use?
When we're looking at them, we're considering them retail in the sense that, again, similarity of construction, similarity of concept with respect to how they set them up, especially with respect to why we're here today when we're talking about dealerships within an auto mall, as we discussed, is very similar to a retail sort of power center. These are large box buildings that sell things. There's an area in the front where they sell stuff similar to a showroom. At the back, there's storage space, warehouse type space, which is similar to the areas where they work on the cars. In big box retail, those areas in the back typically are air conditioned, typically in car dealerships. The vehicle service areas don't usually have air conditioning in them. There is a component of storage in these spaces. There's a component of office. Typically, depending on the size of the dealership that you have, the bigger the dealer, the bigger the brand, there's typically more office space than there would be in a retail. So that's why we've looked at it in that sense. We're not saying that, a superstore is the exact same as a car dealership, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at, okay, if you can't compare car dealerships to car dealerships, and you have no information on it, does that just mean they don't have a market value? You look at what is closest and most comparable in the market. We're not saying that big box retail, Staples, Canadian Tires, Old Navies are all identical to car dealerships, but if you think about it, it's a steel building that has a component that is client-facing in the front and that has a component in the back that is less finished space. And that's essentially our argument.
Okay, I see. Looking at your page number 9, the city has identified, 6 transactions here of automotive dealerships over time, stretching back through 2009, I guess, with the most recent being two Pattison acquisitions in the city. Is the city aware of whether, for each of these sales, whether the in-place automotive brand carried forward following the sale?
I wouldn't be able to speak to that now.
Okay. And is the city aware of the details behind the sale as to inclusion of any consideration for not just the real estate, but goodwill, operations, inventory, buyer lists, things of that nature?
To my knowledge, in speaking with Mr. Pohl in regards to these sales, he had indicated, and this is way prior to taking over these appeals, when he was originally reviewing these sales, that he had contacted the vendors and purchasers of these properties to verify that there wasn't any business components included and that it was for realty only. So based on those just conversations with Mr. Pohl, that's really the extent of the information that I have on these.
Okay. And it's unfortunate that Mr. Neufeld himself isn't here on this particular point, as he has represented a number of these particular ownerships. The information that was put forward on the sale of unit number 90 in this hearing on the first property on the docket was such that yes, the property, and we're looking at sale comparable number 5, unit 90, 3965 Portage Avenue, so in the Point West Auto Park. The information that was put forward on the sale mailer that was included there was such that, yes, the property did trade for the $4,350,000 on that date, and it was indicated that the mortgage that was placed on the property was in the neighborhood of 98 to 99% of the sale price, so 98 to 99% lending value. Would that be typical of a commercial acquisition in terms of loan to value ratios?
I wouldn't think so, no.
Probably not. And again, just with relation to the information that was produced, not by the current assessor, but in the past, the city obviously follows IAAO standards, correct, in production of the market values that are estimated and the derivation of them, the models that are used, etc.
We choose to, we're not obligated to.
One of those issues is, of course, with regard to market value, and I'm reading from an IAAO document here, which I can pass out to the board if you so desire.
You're going to speak to it tonight as well.
All right. So if we look at, if everybody's got it there, the first page, you've got a definition of market value. This is taken from IAAO's glossary for property appraisal and assessment, and it has a definition of market value. It goes through various points. If you go down through those points to the last point under market value, it states, the price represents the normal consideration for the property sold, unaffected by special or creative financing or sales concessions granted by anyone associated with the sale. So certainly with regard to unit number 90, that's specifically identified as one that would not meet those conditions for that particular purpose. There's other reasons as well. In reading through the rest of this, that was the main point that was to be considered. I've also included at the back there the IAAO document with regard to sales verification, and
Is that a separate document than
it was actually a separate
entitled
document.
glossary? I assume this is the front page or something?
It was actually a different IAAO document that one was taken from, and I'm not specifically going to refer to that particular one. It was mainly the creative financing that I wanted to point out.
But just for the sake of my knowledge, you're referring to this document. It is a standalone one issued by the IAAO called Glossary for Property Appraisal and Assessment. Is that correct?
The cover page and the inside first page with text are the glossary for property appraisal and assessment from the IAAO.
Okay.
The last page is a separate IAAO document. So again, just with regard to the sales that are shown on page number 11, does the city have the information with regard to the I guess circumstances surrounding the sale and acquisition of those particular sales that are shown?
Okay. There were a number of questions within that commentary, so I'm going to just reverse and
Free-form answer?
go back to the beginning if possible. The city adheres to the Municipal Assessment Act with regards to the definition of value, and that's outlined in the Municipal Assessment Act. And it says value means in respect to the property being appraised under this act, the amount of that property might be reasonably expected to realize if sold in the open market on the applicable reference date by a willing seller and to a willing buyer. That is the definition of value that we follow in the Assessment and Taxation Department. Second, when it comes to IAAO standards, if you turn to page 32, we are not obligated by legislation to adhere to the IAAO standards with respect to all of their information. We choose,
Sorry, page
32, the back of IAAO technical standards on ratio studies with respect to mass appraisal, and we're not obligated to be adhering to all IAAO standards, and to my knowledge we are adhering to standards on mass appraisal and ratio studies. We are not obligated to adhere to everything that the IAAO states. We are not legislated to do so. We choose to follow their standards on ratio studies because when it comes to assessment, they are an association that is respectable and sets the level for assessment. And so when we do mass appraisal, we try to set our standards for ratio studies to them. But when it comes to market value, that's outlined in the Municipal Assessment Act, and that is what we are officers of in the Assessment and Taxation Department.
Right. So the, as you've said, it is a respectable organization. IAAO is essentially call it the policy setter in a general sense for the assessment field in North America. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
It's the organization that that assessors look to for policy standards, essentially, or input into their models. Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Chair, just going to ask a quick question. So I have further questions on or information, I guess, with regard to the sales that are presented, but it's probably not particularly fair to ask questions of somebody that doesn't necessarily have the background on them. I intend to speak to them in my presentation. Is that fair?
That's quite fair.
Okay. I will make, I guess, the one exception, because there is information on the one in here. Let's look at, because I believe there's an email. Sale comparables 1 and 6. These were both acquisitions by or leases and then acquisitions agreed to in advance by the Jim Pattison Group out of Vancouver. That's correct, is it?
That's what the email states.
Okay, so, and number 1 was Subaru, and number 6 was a Toyota dealership, correct? And I don't mean to be pedantic, I'm just asking about questions.
Yes, I'm aware that the Pembina one is Subaru. I don't know exactly what region it is, but if you say it's Toyota, and it says on the email, Frontier Toyota 1486, but yes, that is correct.
So in looking at even the email here, it is it's stating that the properties were leased out to the new tenant, that being Jim Pattison Group, under whatever legal entity that they've assigned for this, which I guess is Frontier Acquisition Inc. in both of these cases, I believe. It states that they have leased it out at an above market rent with the intent to purchase, correct? So the lease rate that was set is already stated as being an above market lease. I will speak to the others in my evidence when we get there. Looking at your page number 20 onwards, and this is with regard to the municipal board decision on Unit 90, 3965 Portage Avenue and the realty decision for this property.
This does look like the municipal board. It says the address is Unit 90, yes,
Yeah.
3965, Westport Chrysler Dodge. It does say that. Also says it's for an assessment year of 2003, so I didn't put this evidence together, but I'm not sure how applicable something from an assessment year of 2003 is when we're talking about 2020. That's some time, that's a lot of different market things that are happening. So again,
Absolutely.
if this was my brief, that probably would not be in there because I'm not sure what relevance it has.
Without question, certainly the market is different than 2003, and that really isn't going to be what I'm questioning. When we look at the evidence that is presented here, in the municipal board order, if you look at your page number 22, it states that there's essentially, well, I'll point out at the top of the page, 22, with regard to the income approach, the parties agree on the following components: vacancy rates, management expense at that time of 3%, which they were calling management, structural repair expense of 2%, as well as shortfall. So that's what they're stating that they were in agreement on. The matters that the parties were in disagreement on were market rent, cap rate, and consideration of non-recoverable infrastructure expenses. So when we go through the document and move on to the non-recoverable infrastructure expenses, just trying to find the relevant page here. So looking at page number 26, at the bottom there, item number 3, and this is the board's reasoning in their analysis and conclusions, states that with respect to the issue of allowances for non-recoverable infrastructure costs, the board heard limited evidence from the assessor. The main argument advanced by Mr. Kazook was that the market rent would reflect the common element interests. The market rent applied to the subject is reflective of what similar automobile dealerships would expect to achieve in the marketplace. In selecting an appropriate net market rent, the board did not make any allowance for the significant additional infrastructure expenses that would be required to be paid by any purchaser in Point West. Mr. Neufeld presented a brief discussion regarding Waverly Auto Mall, also being condo title development, but the evidence was the extent of its infrastructure was minor in comparison to the subject. The board will therefore accept Mr. Neufeld's calculations for non-recoverable infrastructure expenses and deduct them in the calculation of the subject's market value. In making this decision, the board considered that no purchaser would pay a net market rent of $9 per square foot, plus the additional common element costs, including their proportionate share of non-recoverable infrastructure costs, if they could acquire an equally desirable property at a rental rate of $9 per square foot and not pay any additional common element fees. And then it gets into the calculation of the market value here. And when you go through the line items, we get down to the expenses where it says less, they have management, other, shortfall, and then what they've termed in their decision, additional maintenance, non-recoverable infrastructure. Following that, we have an NOI, cap rate, indicated market value, and following that, they then make another deduction, less infrastructure, net present value of future rehabilitation, deduction of $43,778. And then they arrive at their market value, which they then round. Now, the point of this is not the values in any sense. It's the theory behind it that is being discussed. It's not what the value was in 2003 or the rental rates or the vacancy rates. It's that the theory behind the inclusion of the non-recoverable infrastructure components, which are specific to the Point West site and a very small number of other sites in the city, do need to be considered and do need to be reflected in the valuation of these properties. Now, I guess my ultimate question with regard to that is that the city followed this model for a considerable number of years until they changed it in 2016. Is there, are you aware of why that was adjusted in the city's modeling of the Point West properties?
To my knowledge, it was not 2016. To my knowledge, it was 2000 and I think 10 was possible. It was either 10 or 12.
No.
Well, I got different information from someone else today. But to that argument, and again, I wasn't saying that we're in 2020 and the market has definitely changed from this municipal board order. My argument was based on the theory behind the municipal board order and what was in place. This is from an assessment of 2003. There was a 4-year cycle, so I would assume the reference date would have been like 1999. The subject property was built in 1999. Auto malls were, at the time, an unproven concept. It was something that had never happened before in Winnipeg. And when you look at the information and the arguments state, where they talk about no willing buyer would pay the same rent as somewhere else if they have to then pay additional infrastructure costs. They would just go elsewhere. Well, now we're in 2020. Auto malls are a proven concept. It is something where car dealers want to be, and they would choose to pay those additional infrastructure costs because it's better for your business to be in an auto mall where most people are going to buy their vehicles than being in a standalone auto dealer. And that's why the city doesn't recognize that anymore, because when this municipal board order was written, auto malls were new. It was a concept, to my knowledge, that wasn't something that was tested, and it's now been in the market and been in place for some time. And being a citizen of the city of Winnipeg, I have bought all my vehicles from either the Point West Auto Mall or the Waverly Auto Mall, and I have not gone to a standalone dealer because me as a customer, a purchaser, I want to be able to go to one place, similar to the retail power nodes that you spoke of, and do all my shopping at once. I want to be able to go to one place and go to dealer and see what they have to offer me without having to drive all over the city. So to me, just based on logic and being a purchaser, it's beneficial to be in a place like that. Similar to it's beneficial for you to have your business in a power node of retail, because that's where people are going to go when they want to get all their shopping done. That's why I don't feel that this theory stands to reason anymore. So that's why I don't feel that this municipal board is relevant. And again, that's why we're here today, because of our difference of opinion.
Fair enough. The board order doesn't specifically speak to either the concept of an auto mall or the newness of that structure, etc., does it?
It doesn't, but that's my interpretation when you're looking at what happened in the market in 2003, just using your rationale versus what's happening in the market today.
And as you had mentioned it, forgive me, do you live in relatively close proximity to the Point West Auto Mall, and then would that be one of the factors that you would consider in purchasing of your vehicles there?
I used to live in close proximity, although there are a number of dealerships on that side of Portage Avenue that are not at the Auto Mall. And then I've bought 2 vehicles from the Point West Auto Mall when I lived in Linden Woods, which is significantly further away, and I should go to the Waverly Auto Mall. And I did recently buy my vehicle from the Waverly Auto Mall and live near the Waverly Auto Mall. But again, as a purchaser, you're going to go somewhere that's easy, that you don't have to go to a million places. And it's not with respect to where you live. I think it's, if I owned a car dealership business, I would want to be somewhere like that. But again, as I said, it's difference of opinion, and that's why we're here today.
Fair enough. I have, is the city aware of agreements that they have struck utilizing that exact structure on Point West Auto Mall?
Using infrastructure costs?
Using infrastructure costs?
To my knowledge, we were using them up until about 2010 or 12. It's not my knowledge that we've used them since then.
So if I were to, and it's difficult because you're the assessor here, not others, I've dealt with these particular properties since 2009, I believe. So I do have the background on them, and I was, of course, speaking with the assessor that had presented the briefs initially here, Mr. Cole, and it's both of our understanding that that changed in the 2016 cycle, not in 2010. Certainly that 2010 would have been the first time I was representing them, and without doubt the non-recoverables were in place at that time period, and for a number of cycles since then.
I was under the impression it was 2012, and when I asked someone today, they had said it was 2010.
Okay.
I did not go back to all of our values to verify that because it was very close to when this hearing was starting.
Absolutely. Understood. Is the city aware of other decisions in the Point West Auto Park for the 2020 realty timeframe? I have material here that I feel is rebuttal that I would like to pass out specifically with regard to the non-recoverable issue and decisions that have already been taken with regard to two properties in Point West Auto Mall.
Okay.
That being Unit 35 and Unit number 60, where they specifically...
So this marks the end of your questions, and we will now do the rebuttal of part of the assessment's presentation.
If you can hang on for just a second, and I do apologize for the time this is taking, but it's a relatively important lot of properties here. So this would be both of those.
Mr. Chairman, do we typically accept Board of Revision decisions from hearings that happened prior that the evidence was not, are we not supposed to be discussing with the evidence in front of us today?
So these are specifically in relation to the issues that are coming up with regard to Point West Auto Park and the specific issues that are being discussed here today, and they are relevant and have already
I
been.
don't mind in the case of something where what I understand the applicant is doing here is trying to illuminate a concept in appraisal methodology, whether infrastructure costs ought to be included or excluded.
Okay.
That's what's in this document that the assessor has presented.
Well,
What is in what you are proposing
I
to present?
I will leave it up to the panel, obviously, as that is your role. What's in the decisions is the fact that this has already been decided in this cycle by this board on two other properties where they received the same information from myself as the appellant representing the same ownership in the same location at Point West with the same structure where the non-recoverable...
Then I see that
was
as
accepted.
something quite different than what we were discussing, this municipal board case from 2003, which is really about methodology. If you're trying to point to the fact that we have made certain decisions already, that's not something that we want to see. This panel will only deal with what we're hearing today, and we want to disregard what has been done by our fellow panel members, even when it is the same year. We have to go on the basis of the hearing
Okay,
information that we
I
present.
do understand that that is the policy of the board, et cetera. Yeah, thank you. I simply want to point out that this information has been brought forward on two different occasions, carefully considered, and a decision arrived at that was in support of ourselves as the appellant with regard to the non-recoverable additional non-recoverable expenses that I will be discussing.
Well, if your argument was compelling in those other occasions, then I think you would have to rely on the notion that you could be compelling this time too.
And that is fair. Let's move on. I believe that is the end of my questions at this point. Thank you very much.
Mr. McIntyre.
I just have, well, I have a number of questions. One of Mr. Smith. You were at the hearing on December 10th,
I was indeed.
and was that municipal board not discussed then?
Which one?
The one we just spent 15 minutes discussing now?
It was, but it was discussed by another appellant, and it was some time ago, so I do want to be clear that with regard to our position on that, make sure that it's fresh in the mind of the panel. That's our, so I don't want to waste anybody's time, but I do recognize your point.
So the auto mall, is that assessed the same way as, say, Region Avenue? Excluding this infrastructure cost? Like, are they assessed as using the retail concept? Yeah.
Yes, they would be assessed using the same model. With respect to rental rates, I typically think that our rental rates are based on size and age of property. That's sort of what drives our rental rates. But with respect to cap rate, vacancy, and shortfall and our non-recoverable, I think those parameters are the same across the board.
Okay, and the last question was, the mailer shows a leasable area of 23,521, and I can appreciate the fact that you didn't prepare this, but the brief says something different.
The brief says 24,159, and I believe both myself and the applicant are in agreement on that leasable area.
Which one?
20, on page 4, 24,159 square feet.
Okay.
So our income workup that's shown on page 4, the leasable area there, I believe I wrote a little check mark next to it, so I believe both myself and Mr. Smith are agreeing on that leasable area for both of our paragraphs.
I just find it odd that the person filling out the mailer is out by, and that's not your fault, it's just, it may be something to check for the next reassessment.
Quite possibly.
That's all my question.
Thank you. Mr. Foster.
There's an effective date from 1999 to 2009. Do you know anything about that? They put addition on the enlarge the dealership?
When the actual year built is the exact same as the effective year built, that means we don't have an effective age on the property and that it's the same. When it says 1999 to 2009 and it's both the same for actual and effective, it typically shows a range because there have been additions on the property. So it'll show a range of the different additions that have happened. So based on this information, what's here, the original building, the very first part of the building that was built in 1999, and the most recent addition that was placed on this building was 2009. How many additions they've done to the building, when those happened, I do not know. But I do know that the first portion of the building was built in 1999 based on these records, and the last portion of the building that was added to it was 2009, just based on knowing our system and how we present our information.
Okay. Would it, the cap rate change from the 1999 building to 2009 building? Not sure.
We place, the cap rate I think is just our model cap rate for car dealerships. I can't speak to if we have different cap rates for them. Again, it's a blended cap rate for the whole building.
Okay. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Going to the topic of the infrastructure costs, recovery of them. Granted, you would not have put this in if you were preparing the material, but since it's here and we've waded into it.
Yep.
At that time, 2003, am I correct in thinking that auto malls were pretty new? There was 2 of them at that point. And would it be correct to assume that at least some of the value of those properties was contributed by the fact that dealers wanted to be there as opposed to someplace else. Is it true that, in your opinion, that there was some increased value owing to the attractiveness of being there?
Increased value in what sense? Like in the sense that they were...
I don't want to really talk about their business value, but the business value, in the end, there's some reflection on the property value. Would that property value have benefited from the fact that people really wanted to locate their dealerships together like that in a mall?
I think that is a bonus to a property owner. If you can own the property where people want to be, and those are the businesses that you have, I believe, and I've sort of had this opinion in prior cycles, and I don't deal with car dealerships all that often, but in my opinion, if you are a car dealership in an auto mall versus a standalone dealer on Portage Avenue by yourself that might have another dealership just down the street, I would think, as a property owner, I would want to have the property in the auto mall because I have a more valuable piece of property.
Okay. Does it then stand to be logical that the owner of the mall would be able to say to somebody, well, there's infrastructure costs here, of course, because this is a condominium, and that's the price of admission. You got to essentially pay for these costs as well. That has a somewhat downward impact on the actual value of the property because the expenses have gone up.
I think those are the type of expenses that is just a general expense of wanting to do business there. I think it doesn't reflect so much in the fact of the property value. I think it's one of those things, like you said, if you want to, you got to pay to play. And if people,
is it business value, not property value?
I think it's a gray area between that because you have to, it has an impact on the business and it helps the business. And as a property owner, you have a valuable piece of property because businesses want to be there and they're willing to pay those costs. So I think that, yes, you have additional costs that you have to pay, but as a piece of property, those have value to purchasers. For example, when you look at home ownership versus condo ownership, you have to pay condo fees to be a condo owner. So people would say, well, why wouldn't you just buy a house and not have to pay condo fees? Well, there's benefits to those people who want to buy it. So as a property owner, you own a different type of property when you own a condo development versus whether you own a property that's not a condo. It's just the type of property that you have. So I think you have to remember that when you're comparing it, that you've chosen to have a condo title for this because you know that those sort of things are important to those people who want to be there.
Okay.
So I do think it does have a value to it.
All right.
And I don't think those infrastructure costs would be seen as a negative, because if they were seen as a negative, I think we would be seeing vacancies in auto malls versus, especially at the Waverly Auto Mall, expanding and building new buildings. Like there's a few newer buildings at the Waverly Auto Mall. People are expanding that there. And I would think if that was a negative to your property value, these property owners would have a hard time keeping their tenants there. And
Am I right in understanding that most of those malls though have some, that they're really up against the wall when it comes to additional land and additional dealerships?
I know at the Point West Auto Mall, in discussions with a few individuals, because I had worked on some new construction at a couple of the units that are on the docket today, they do have some restrictions with respect to land at the Point West Auto Mall because they don't have any land to expand there. So that is a difficult situation just because they have, in that specific area, they've started developing around there. You know, they have the Iceplex there. The Red River Exhibition Park owns all of that, and they've now started subdividing that for commercial use. So they have started replotting a lot of that space along Portage that's beside the auto mall. So they are limited at Point West with expanding their space.
All right.
But I do think it is still somewhere that people want to be. And
Okay, well then on that point, these were the circumstances in 2003. And if I'm correct in assuming that part of the price of admission to an auto mall was to bear infrastructure costs, and that has some reflection on the value of the property. Today's 2020, and we see along Keniston, Audi, Porsche, Lexus, Mercedes locating along the street, not in a mall. Is the attractiveness of a mall breaking down? And does that have any bearing on this whole notion of the extent to which infrastructure costs have an impact on the property value in the mall?
I'm not sure without the solid evidence of talking to all of those owners who have been building along Keniston as to whether or not the infrastructure costs have impacted them and why they've moved there. Because similar to any property type, there are a lot of decisions involved why people choose to put their businesses in certain places. And with respect to Keniston and the Audi and Porsche and I think the either Mercedes or BMW, I'm not sure which one. Seasons of Tuxedo is a big thing, and was big when IKEA came, and the more they developed that area, I think they put one of the auto dealers in that area. I think people who were coming into the business and wanting to build new dealerships, they saw that as an attractive place because it was a place that sort of is a retail power center node. And you see lots of car dealerships going there because it ends up being sort of akin to an auto mall. And yes, they don't have infrastructure costs, but again, without having a full study done on, yes, it is a detraction to value, that is why I've built my dealership here. It's just all of our sort of opinions and how we feel about knowing the marketplace. But we don't really have any solid evidence on it. And the city's position for a number of cycles, we can argue about how many cycles, was that we have not applied those costs. And to my knowledge, this panel here today has not been applying those costs in previous cycles, in the most recent previous cycles. So I think, and that's where the decision has to land in your very trusting hands to decide what you think is right. And I mean, the evidence that we have, and I believe Mr. Smith has, is essentially this municipal board order and what each of us has to say, so.
Okay. I'll move to something that's a little more precise perhaps, and that is the 7.15 cap rate. The range for retail, which page 6. Power center retail range, low is 6.15, high is 9.4. Fairly sizable range there. Do you know why 7.15 would have been selected?
I'm not sure why the model selects that. I just know that our 20th and 80th percentiles are 7.15 and 7.3, which is a much tighter range. And just based on looking at the information and knowing the cap rate that we have, you know, when you look at the range of the 20th and 80th percentiles, as I stated in our presentation, our opinion is it's more valuable to be in an auto mall.
You know, does the model default to the 20th percentile?
I don't know.
Or is it just coincidence?
I think it's just coincidence, but with respect to us looking at it and talking about them.
Right. Lastly, I'd like to wade into the 2%, 7% non-recoverable expense thing again with some reticence, but you were talking about the 5% having been a property management amount, an expense, and not the old other category, which is the true non-recoverable expenses. What was, just relatively briefly, what's your understanding of what had been included in the 5% management expense? And how clearly was that not true non-recoverable expenses?
To my knowledge, based on the rebuttal packages I've read of Altus and Film O'Reilly and Stevenson and our position from the city with respect to what we present in our agenda and with respect to what we present in Our rebuttal package is non-recoverable expenses are covered in 3 points of our income stream. The 2% expenses of non-recoverable, the shortfall, and the vacancy. Those are our non-recoverable expenses that we have in our income stream. To my knowledge, the 5% was a historic management expense that was an expense relating to standards management fees charged by the owner. The 2% is a general expense allowance that was always intended to include expenses incurred by the landlord that are not recovered by tenants. These expenses could include advertising, promotion, professional fees, and structural repairs. So to my knowledge, that is what our recoverable expenses are, and that's what it was. So we have always included for non-recoverables a vacancy allowance, a shortfall.
But what is the management expense?
The management expense, to my knowledge, was recoverable management, based on the information that
Meaning what though?
they weren't non-recoverable management expenses. They were strictly related, and I just read it here. They were relating to standard management fees that were charged by the owner. I can go through all of this if the panel would like.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get an idea of what is that management?
What is the
What is the 5%? What is the activity done by a manager that falls within the 5% category that is not any one of the true non-recoverable expenses?
I think I have to keep this simple, and my apologies to the panel. Again, we are looking at 2020. I can read through our agenda that we have. The 5% management was in 2018. We aren't considering that here today. I am not presenting evidence on what that was, why it was there, why it's not there.
We'll read that again in our deliberations. I'll leave it there.
Because, again, the city is trying to really focus. We are taking a fresh look. The non-recoverable expense percentage that we have right now is 2%. It was 2% prior, it's 2% now. If there's an argument between it being a different percentage and the agent is saying that it's 7 and we're saying it's 2, it's in your hands to decide that.
Thank you. That's all my questions. It is time for a break. 5-minute break, and then we will resume.
Then we'll do a very quick rebuttal and move on.
Yes. Okay. Great. Set to go. We will resume then with rebuttal.
Okay, there's a bunch of copies for you. As we've all heard this numerous times, I will be very expedient with regard to dealing with the rebuttal evidence here. Essentially, we have three documents or sections. We're illustrating that the City of Winnipeg appears to be stepping out on its own with regard to the consideration of non-recoverable expenses and the, call it the degree or the elimination of categories of ones that are included and allowable with regard to non-recoverables. We're looking at the province of Manitoba, so obviously Winnipeg falls under the same jurisdiction as the province of Manitoba with regard to assessment. And then we look at two of our neighboring jurisdictions, that being Saskatchewan and Ontario. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but we will quickly go through them. Essentially, the first page that we're looking at inside the cover is a property that I represented in the 2020 assessment cycle in the city of Brandon. And Manitoba assessment obviously was the party representing the assessment. So if you look at the third page in, this is the province of Manitoba's workup with regard to the valuation for that property. It was an income-producing property in the city of Brandon. If you go through the chart on what's called page number 9 there, the third page in, you get down to effective gross income partway down the chart. The next line item is termed management percent it's showing, and the province of Manitoba is using a 5% allowance for what they're terming management in their valuation model. You go down 2 lines and we have other percent, and this is indicated as 2%. Now, this is standard with the province of Manitoba. It's what they have done with other income-producing properties in their model in the past cycles that I've represented properties in. It remains so going through the 2020 cycle. Clearly, their understanding and knowledge of the market is such that there has been no change in the marketplace to indicate that the removal of this particular allowance would be appropriate. If you move into the next page, we're looking at the Saskatchewan jurisdiction. I'm not going to go through this in any detail other than, as we have numerous times before, other than to suffice it to say, if you read through the material here, it does clearly indicate that the non-recoverable expenses do need to be taken into account in the valuation of income-producing properties, and essentially the amount. They use examples, but the amounts that they refer to are greater than 2%, obviously. The next jurisdiction that we have is the province of Ontario, where we have the methodology guide, and in this case I've got valuing office buildings in Ontario. Now, we're not valuing office buildings, but the model is not different between the income-producing types with regard to the inclusion of non-recoverable expenses. So again, if you go through this document and read the text that's involved, as we have presented to the panels numerous times, if you go through this, you can see that the province of Ontario and their governing assessment body, Municipal Property Assessment Corp, MPAC, recognizes the need to include these non-recoverable expenses and the essentially extent of them. And again, they provide example indicating a much greater percentage of effective gross income to be used as a non-recoverable expense in their example than the city of Winnipeg is currently allowing as a 2% allowance. Following this, and it's been pointed out obviously by the panel that you're not looking at these, but we have supportive decisions included at the back of the brief with regard to the re-inclusion of the 5% in the 2020 cycle from decisions before the board in this 2020 assessment cycle. I can speak further to it, but we've covered it many times. I will leave it to questions.
Ms. Ware.
Mr. Smith, looking through your evidence that you presented here, you have this information from the province of Manitoba. Is the province of Manitoba a different assessment jurisdiction than the city of Winnipeg?
In what sense? The governing legislation?
Nope. Are we a different assessment jurisdiction?
Well, the province and the city are guided by the same act, but there is an exception made for the city in that they have their own assessing authority.
Okay, so we would agree that we're both governed by the Municipal Assessment Act, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. And we will both agree that we are separate assessment jurisdictions with respect to our authority. The province of Manitoba assesses their properties and the city of Winnipeg assesses theirs, correct?
Correct.
and the province of Manitoba sets their own guidelines on how they assess properties, and the city of Winnipeg sets their own guidelines on how they assess properties, correct?
Indeed they do.
Okay. When you're looking at the municipal or province of Manitoba, you've listed very nicely here an income valuation workup, which I appreciate. Do you have a definition of that 5% management from the province of Manitoba, of what they define that as?
No, they do not provide that in the evidence that they provide at their hearings.
So you're just showing 5%? But you
I'm
don't
showing
actually
the
know what's included in it?
consistency of their modeling from the current cycle to past cycles in relation to both province of Manitoba and city of Winnipeg.
Do you know what goes into the province of Manitoba's modeling and how they come up with their assessed values, how they derive their net rents and their management percentages? And to be able to understand those models, wouldn't you have to look at the definitions and the parameters that they use for their modeling to understand what's behind it?
No, not necessarily. When they're consistent with regard to the application of particular valuation parameters, and you've had basic discussions with representatives, it's relatively clear how they're defined.
So if it's relatively clear how they're defined, would you be able to define the management percentage?
Or utilized in any event.
Does the city of Winnipeg provide a handbook, an external document every reassessment cycle indicating what is used for the valuation of all commercial properties?
They do, and I went to the trouble early on in this cycle when we were all fresh and young in the 2020 year of providing 2010, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20 valuation guidebooks showing the consistency of the modeling with the change in 2020.
I'm not disputing that there was a change from 5% to not having 5%.
Okay.
I'm asking, were the definitions of those things in those handbooks? So when you're looking at the city of Winnipeg versus the province, have you been able to compare those definitions to know that those in fact are the exact same things?
I have not been able to compare it to the province of Manitoba, as they have not provided specific definitions in a guidebook.
Okay, so it's hard to draw some concrete conclusions from this.
Not particularly. When we have the discussions, and it's relatively apparent when one reads it's experienced in this realm, I guess is how I would put it.
Moving on to your information about SAMA, does Saskatchewan have a different legislation governing their assessment jurisdiction than the City of Winnipeg?
Very clearly, other jurisdictions would have different governing legislation, yes.
And you talked about how they do indicate that non-recoverable operating expenses should be considered, correct?
I did.
Does the City of Winnipeg consider non-recoverable operating expenses in their valuation?
Yes, and we're not stating that the City of Winnipeg is not including non-recoverable expenses in any sense, because they are. They've simply shrunk it somewhat dramatically and eliminated a large component of that based on a misreading of terminology with regard to what one particular expense allowance was.
So what is the implication of including things from SAMA and MPAC with respect to non-recoverable operating expenses? Because clearly they're not showing what a typical non-recoverable percentage should be, because wouldn't that have to be based on information from the particular market where the assessments are being derived? There isn't just a non-recoverable percentage accepted across Canada. Wouldn't you have to look at non-recoverable expenses from income and expense mailers from your particular assessment jurisdiction where you're arriving at your assessed values?
Absolutely, you would, and so let's speak to that now that it's in play. Let's have that discussion. So yes, there is no specific percentage. Obviously, you need to look at the market that you're in with regard to non-recoverable expenses, etc. So that's why we're looking at Saskatchewan as a near neighbor, as well as Ontario on the other side. Now, yes, there can be variability in between particular areas, but by and large, the categories that are included in non-recoverables are going to be the same categories. It's the theory that we're looking at, not the specific numbers as such. So if we went, while they don't provide They don't provide a specific percentage and what's included necessarily in great detail in their non-recoverables. If you look at the example that they provide, and that's provided in Ontario, it certainly does point towards a greater allowance than is currently being allowed by the city of Winnipeg. Nor do they, I believe, if we, and in the interest of time, I glossed over things and I did not go through this in detail. If we go back, I believe if we read through this again, it does specifically not mention property management as one of the things that needs to be included in the non-recoverable, as it is non-recoverable, as it always has been non-recoverable, which of course points to the fact that the allowance that was made by the city of Winnipeg was not specific to a property management fee, but rather the management of that property and the expenses that are incurred by an owner that cannot be recovered from tenants.
Can you point me to that in this information that you're talking
Given
about?
the time frame that we have here, I went through it rather quickly and I haven't highlighted the particular
You just made
sections.
mention as to,
I did,
it talks
yes.
about management being a non-recoverable, and I'm just wondering where that is in here to just expedite me.
No, what I said was that it's not included as a non-recoverable.
Okay,
Property management fees is
okay,
what I had stated.
and
I
so,
believe that's included in the evidence. And again, in the interest of time, I did not go through and highlight each of these. We can do so, but that's up to the panel, of course.
I just want to wrap my head around what you're trying to present, because the information I'm looking at in front of me, I'm not getting the argument that you're making from what's here.
Okay, so let's make that argument then, and let's back up, because this is a crucial point, and there has been, well, pretty consistent decisions with regard to this that we've been happy with. There have been some aberrations,
Aside from the assessor not understanding, it's maybe more important as to whether the panel members understand or not.
Absolutely,
Could we recess for just a short moment, please?
certainly.
I was just asking for him to point to the information, how he's making his argument of the 5%, because it's not whether or not I understand. I don't think he's proving to me what he's saying from this document that's been presented as rebuttal. So I was just going through and asking the questions based on that.
So before we recess, I'm absolutely happy to go through that process and provide to the panel if you so desire. I'm just simply trying to be efficient and recognize that we've all looked at this information several dozen times already.
Okay, thank you. All right, in our recess, we considered whether we wanted to go into more detail on the 5%, 2%, et cetera, and notwithstanding questions you might have, we'd really not like to spend more time on it because we have heard these arguments on numerous occasions, and we feel it's unlikely that we're going to get something different today, given in part that I don't think it's stepping out of bounds and saying that the two sides continue to talk apples and oranges, and it would be really nice if they could get together and settle on kumquats or something. It's perplexing for the board that this debate carries on, and I think has not benefited from a proper collaborative review of how this ought to be dealt with. At any rate, we'd rather not spend more time on the topic tonight.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. From the city's side, I was more than happy to just limit it to the non-recoverable expenses presented in both of our briefs, but because of the rebuttal being handed out, I was obligated to have to
Right, all
go
right.
through it. So,
All right. We're done with rebutting.
We're done.
Okay, then could we have your evidence?
You've asked your questions. I can't remember.
Oh, no, we didn't get that far, did we?
No.
We didn't get that far.
oh,
My
I had
apologies.
one more question before we,
On the rebuttal.
on the rebuttal.
All right.
Mr. Smith, you included numerous board orders, which you said that the board doesn't want to cover. Are you aware of other board orders where this panel for 2020 has not applied the 5% back in and they've accepted the city's 2% non-recoverable?
So my answer to that would be, obviously there have been decisions that were such. My particular understanding of the properties that I've represented is that we're in the 85% plus range of decisions acknowledging that the 5% non-recoverable should be reinstituted. But we're not looking at those, so that is simply my statement with regard to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. McIntyre.
No questions.
Mr. Buss.
Questions of,
About,
on the rebuttal, no questions.
no? All right. In that case, then I have no questions. Therefore, we can move on.
Great. All right. As mentioned at the beginning, we have a lot of obviously commonalities with regard to these properties, so I'm going to try and be efficient in the presentation of such. What I'm going to do, I believe, at the beginning here, after going through the initial portion of the hearing, is cover a couple of bases that are applicable to all of the properties, and that's for the panel to keep in mind as we go forward in looking at each of the individual properties. So there's been a number of things that have come up, one of them being the comparability of auto malls to power centers, essentially. A second one being the development of auto dealers in the kind of Kenaston corridor in recent times. And one of the points of my brief as well is the auto dealership, the future of the auto dealership industry, essentially. Now that's 3 points that I'd like to, I guess, run through to start with. So if we go back in time, and the point of this is not that there's existing vacancy in the auto mall or anything of that nature. It's simply that times change, industries change, demand changes, etc. So if we go back to that 2008 through 2010 time frame, there was a dramatic shift in world finances. We had a lot of impact on auto dealers. A number of them went into Chapter 11 or bankruptcy and had to reorganize, etc. And that had a dramatic impact on how they operated their businesses. There was a lot of consolidation and a lot of reduction in terms of the number of dealerships out there. In the Point West Auto Mall itself at that time, there was both General Motors as well as Saturn and Chevrolet, I believe it was. No, we had three dealership brands in any case, three major ones, Saturn being somewhat smaller, that were forced to consolidate. Saturn closed up shop entirely and went out of business, and the unit that they were in had to be repurposed. There were no brands available to put into that space, so as the overall auto park, or the majority of the individual condo units, are owned by Birchwood, they being the biggest automobile dealership owner in the city, were unable to draw a brand that wanted to be present in that particular property at that time frame. So what they did was repurpose it and turn it into a truck store, which it remains to today. So they sell various brands of trucks out of that particular center. So they've managed to make a go of it by repurposing that property. So the demand was not there for another brand to rush in and take over that particular property. General Motors and our other brand both shrank from 2 dealerships in the park to 1 each. So you had each of those brands shrinking to one particular dealership in the park. Now, in the case of those two dealerships, they were able to put another brand or a second brand, move a brand over into those particular units. So they did carry on in those spaces. But the point of this being that there's not necessarily the huge draw or demand for these particular auto malls, or more to the point, this particular location that perhaps is being suggested by the city. Now, that's one particular point in time. So let's move forward to the present time frame and look at what's occurring now. So if you look at the Kenaston corridor there, as has been mentioned, there's a number of brands that are moving to that area. The reason they're moving to that area, and it's not new dealerships, they're moving their existing dealerships to those locations. The reason they're moving there is they're moving closer to where their target clientele is. Now, in that southwest segment of Winnipeg, you have, going from the west, we have Charleswood, Tuxedo, River Heights, Fort Garry, Fort Richmond, Waverly West, etc. And you cross the river and you're into St. Vital and so forth, right? If you look at the demographics of the areas, these tend to be areas with higher income levels, and they do tend to buy, obviously, more premium brand automobiles than perhaps some other segments of the city. And there's studies done by the dealers that can show this. They don't locate there by accident. They're moving to where their market is. So when you have Mercedes relocating down there, Mercedes relocated off of Portage Avenue at the corner of Moray to their new location down there. It's not a new dealership. They moved from corner of Moray and Portage to the new location because Mercedes said, move to where we want you to move and build this glitzy dealership, or you don't have you no longer represent us, and we'll move our dealership on to somebody else. So it's pay or play. You do this, or you're no longer our representative in the market. We also have Porsche that has moved down there. There's a number of others that are moving there. And looking at the Point West Auto Mall, there's two brands that are leaving. One of them is Lexus. Lexus is leaving the auto mall to locate in that Kenaston corridor in a new structure for the same reasons. They're moving to where their market is, and Lexus themselves said, we don't want to be located in the Point West Auto Mall. We want you to build our brand new property to our current spec, where we want you to build it, or you're no longer our representative in the marketplace. So Lexus is going there, and Jaguar is also going there and doing the same thing. So if you look down that corridor now, you have your the majority of your premium brands are moving to that corridor. So what is the impact of that going to be on the mall? Well, you're losing two brands out of the mall. Now they're in co-branded locations. One property, Unit 70, is Toyota and Lexus. So Toyota will remain there. It's rather large for them. I'm not sure what will occur for the remainder of the property. Perhaps they'll utilize it all. I'm not really sure. The other one is Unit 10, where it's Jaguar, Land Rover, Volvo. And Jaguar is exiting, leaving you with Volvo, Land Rover. There's not a lot of Volvos being transacted these days, and Land Rover is a pretty niche brand in most markets. So it's certainly not certain what is going to occur there. There's no immediate brand that is coming forward that can be slotted into that particular location. So While the buildings won't necessarily be dark as they weren't single occupants, they will certainly be underutilized, is my contention going forward. And so this speaks to demand as well, right? If auto parts were the be-all and end-all of selling cars, then brands wouldn't be leaving this particular location. They would be fighting to get in, essentially. So if one were to leave, there wouldn't be any shortage of competition to get another one in place. Now, in mentioning that Birchwood is the largest dealership group in the city, that is correct. They have obviously the Point West Auto Park, but they also have their Regent properties, which is the two main centers that they have, and now they're going to have a couple on that Kenaston strip as well. So they're sprinkled throughout. In terms of automobiles sold and profitability, Point West lags well behind Regent in their business, and they have the numbers that show that Point West underperforms relative to their Regent location, and it's simply a function of the location and ease of access, demand, etc. We'll go through that in my presentation, but it should be clear that Point West is not a premium location in the city of Winnipeg for selling automobiles based on the actual production of those locations. When you have the same brand in two locations, and in each instance they're underperforming at one location, it does tell you something as far as the metrics go. In relation to comparing auto malls to power centers and big box stores, essentially, I think that certainly deserves a look, and the city has presented a lot of material in that regard. So what we're looking at is clustering, essentially. So in an auto dealership park, auto park rather, you have the clustering of auto dealers. Yes, they locate there for a reason, so that you can shop the various dealers. That was the intent of it in the first place. Pardon me. And it's all cars, right? It's only cars, so you're going there for that one specific purpose. When you look at power centers, whether it be Kenaston and McGilvery and the various big box developments that are there, you go further north in the IKEA conglomeration of retail around there with the new developments there. Go to Polo Park, go to the various other locations such as Regent and Lagimoje there and the power center there. You're looking at retail power centers. So same thing, you get clustering where you have these big box stores being built together, purpose-built for them, for shoppers' ease of access, essentially. They can go and do all of their shopping. They can go to Home Depot and Shoppers Drug Mart and buy some shoes and groceries and all of these things, right? It's the modern retail new developments. Now, that is changing, as everything is changing at the current time frame with the development of the internet and shopping online and the ease of access to information. People can now buy virtually anything online and have it delivered to their door, whether that be by Amazon or any of the other number of companies that are out there that do this, right? You probably all just went through the Christmas season and perhaps ordered something online that got delivered to you that you would formally go and buy in the store. This has had an impact on the retail sphere, and you do see significant change in that realm where we have a large number of big box stores either in the Winnipeg market or in North America in general that are having a very hard time competing, and we do have them either downsizing or going out of business. There's many examples of this that have already been presented to the board already in this cycle, I'm sure, by other appellants that represent the big box centers. So that industry is changing, but the comparability, the base comparability between auto dealers as an auto park and a big box retail node is simply not there. The volume of sales that occurs in these retail nodes is well beyond what occurs in auto dealerships. The format is different in that, pardon me, the selling floor of the big box store is typically very large. If you walk into one of these Home Depots or anything of that nature, Canadian Tire, name a big one, the majority of the store is selling floor, and it's stacked. You have aisles that have 2 or 3 levels of goods that are stacked in them. Look at Costco. The storage, much of the product is on the floor, and it's actively being sold on a very continuous basis because they have so much stock and it's all right there. There is obviously a back end for warehouse and shipping, etc., but it's not significant. The majority of it is selling floor. So the rents that they charge for these places are higher, and obviously are also impacted by tenant improvements where a brand needs a particular image to represent themselves. TI is put in, and obviously the rent that's paid is a recovery of tenant improvement allowance that's included as well. Now, we're not making any argument with regard to the TI here. It's simply that your rent there is going to be reflective of that. That's my basic commentary with regard to the comparability of retail big box to dealerships. A dealership, it's you have the sales floor, you have offices, and then you have a significant back end, which is the service area, which is, generally it's what, in the 30 to 40 at the most range with regard to the sales floor and office component, and then you have the back end, which is in the 60 to 70% range in the percent of the building that we're talking about here. So the service area, which is more industrial, is significantly larger. That is my overall basic commentary that I wanted to get forward to start with, rather than doing it piecemeal as we go forward. So if you can keep those comments in mind, we can now get down to looking at the actual properties that we're here for today, as I'm sure Ms. Wareham would certainly like to do, as I do myself. So we're dealing to start with, I believe, with unit number 75, 3965 Portage Avenue. So let's get into it here. Looking at what's called my page number 1 with the chart inside, we have a bit of information regarding the property. You can see the appeal history going back to the 2010 cycle for the subject property and the decisions that came forth, and the general trend with regard to these decisions. Now, it's been a fairly regular decision pattern as you go forward. There was one time where we had to appeal to the municipal board. We subsequently signed an agreement in the 2014 cycle. 2018 is still at the municipal board awaiting scheduling, and we anticipate that will hopefully come forward in the winter coming up. Now, subject property...
The purpose of that information is what?
Well, the purpose of that information, and I think it's absolutely relevant, is that these properties have been under appeal for a number of cycles, and we have a very regular decision pattern with regard to them in looking at the market value. So what we're showing you is not necessarily specific decisions, but the regularity of how those have come out. So,
Well, the history aside, I'd be more interested in really trying to zero in on all of these remaining ones, on your rents, your income approach,
yep.
values, and try to do this as expeditiously as possible.
Absolutely.
We'll be basing our decision on that and not on past history.
And I certainly understand that, Mr. Chair. I do think that it's important that we don't gloss over everything. I have either 8 or 9 properties, whatever it is here today, and I do want to make sure that they are, I sat through a 5.5-hour session on a prior appellant. I have no intention of going through that level of detail, but when I present the background with regard to the property, it's for a purpose. I'm not saying you need to make the same decision, but that is what has occurred here, and I think it's informative to the panel and everybody present. So I will move on to the valuation, and we can move forward. Looking at subject property, the one final overall commentary. So looking, and this has obviously been mentioned to you by the prior appellant, the auto park as a whole is a condominium development in terms of legal ownership. They've been divided into individual units. The Birchwood Auto Group, under the various holding companies, is the owner of nearly the entire auto mall. Now, we're not doing any value and use valuations here. We're looking at market value of those properties. But Birchwood is the overall owner of the vast amount of the individual condos in the Point West Auto Mall. That's a bit of background. Moving forward, we're looking at C3 zoning here, commercial corridor. This is a lower grade of zoning than C4. If we look at the city's retail comparables, they are C4, which is commercial regional, where you can build big box stores and things of that nature, higher end retail. It's not necessarily permitted under the C3 zoning, and we have another specific circumstance that accepts those from the subject property and the others today. Site area for the subject, 2.4 acres, and we have a land to plan area ratio of just 4.53 to 1. This is very small for an automobile dealership in today's day and age. You're looking for an 8 to 1 ratio as a starting point. This being for storage and display of automobiles on site, ease of access for taking test drives, as well as some parking for both staff and obviously purchasers to come to the store. If you go to the auto mall and try and find a spot to park, it's quite difficult actually. They have relatively limited customer parking in the front of these units, and you do often have to drive around and find a spot on the street in order to get to where you're going. The other part with regard to the size is obviously storage of service vehicles on site. Now, it is a critical component. They are under service with regard to land in the auto park. It was developed at a time when things have evolved since that time frame, and they have developed all of the land there, so there's no additional land on which to store product for the dealers on site, so they have to store a lot of product off site. So with relation to modern developments, you would not build them in this manner with such a low land to plan area ratio. So that is a negative with regard to value. The leasable area is shown there. We're in agreement with it. Let's move forward. The pictures of the property are shown beginning on page 2 through page 4, relatively straightforward. The service bays are not shown, but they're pretty standard at the back. Description of the improvement is shown on, or detailed on page number 5. There is a bit of mezzanine space for the subject property, which is taken into account. And we can move forward to my page number 6. As I said in the beginning, we'll cover things once and trust that they'll be considered with all of the properties. With regard to infrastructure, as we began discussing with the city and the decision that was taken by the municipal board on Unit 90, subject property is a condominium development and was under a development agreement with the city of Winnipeg, such that Birchwood and their development arm had to develop all of the infrastructure for the auto park, and rather than, as is typical in development agreements, turning that infrastructure over to the city and it becoming their property and their responsibility, in the case of the subject property, the development agreement was such that it needed that Birchwood retained ownership, not of their own accord. The city was not going to take on these infrastructure costs going forward, and they allowed them to develop on the understanding that they retained ownership and responsibility for the maintenance of the infrastructure of the park. Now, this is a very unique situation. If you're located on Regent or McPhillips or any street within the city retail corridor and you lease building X to do your car dealership, you are paying your rental amount and your normal operating costs for that building and your property taxes, etc. That's the end of the story. The street is there, the lighting is there, the water service is there, the drainage is there, sewage, all of these items are already there. You don't pay anything additional for it outside of your normal property taxes. In the structure that exists at the Point West Auto Park, it's a condominium ownership, and they own all of that infrastructure as a condominium corporation. They own the roadways, they own the lighting, they own the water service, they own the drainage, and there were all the other infrastructure components, water supply, sewers, land drainage, etc., and they're responsible for the maintenance and repair and replacement of that infrastructure. So if you locate on Portage, you pay X amount, and your operating costs and taxes, that's it. If you locate here, you pay your lease, you pay your normal operating costs and taxes, and you pay the additional infrastructure costs that are incurred by the condominium corporation because the city of Winnipeg would not take on this infrastructure under the development agreement. It was specifically done that way. In allowing them to develop this, that they had to retain ownership of it. So moving forward, the point of this is that that infrastructure needs to be serviced and maintained on an annual basis, so they need to plow those roads. There's no city plow that's coming and doing it. They need to patch them, they need to replace lights, things of that nature, the normal annual things that would come up. Long term, they have the replacement overall of this infrastructure, so replacement of the roadways, replacement of any lighting, any sewer lines and or water lines, etc. It's all the responsibility of the condo corp and all borne by the individual properties themselves. So this is an additional cost that you face here outside of the normal situation. The point of that is that this needs to be taken into account in the valuation of these. This is what's referenced in the municipal board decision on Unit 90 and what is discussed later on in my valuation of the property. Zoning for the property is C3 as shown at the bottom of page 6. Again, there's a zoning agreement for the subject property, not the development agreement, but the zoning agreement, such that the auto park development has use restrictions which restrict it specifically, as noted at the top of page 7, to automotive sales and repair. The particular clause is noted there, saying that it's limited to sale, leasing, rental, storage, display, repair, and service of new and used motor vehicles. That's all you can do in this park. You cannot, if one unit goes dark, can't be converted to a smaller big box of any nature. Outside of the fact that they're not designed for retail itself, it's not permitted that you could open up any type of other retail that doesn't service autos within the park. So it's a non-starter. There really is no comparison between retail and the subject in that particular fashion, in that it can't be developed here. That's registered on title. Site itself, shown at the bottom, page 7. I won't elaborate. It's at the point of the park. The location, obviously critical. We've covered a bunch of ground on that. We're at the far west end of the city, outside of the bounds of the perimeter highway by the racetrack, obviously. One of the features of big box retail nodes, power centers, essentially, is that you have a node within an area that has population surrounding it, and you have the support, all that supportive retail. That's not the case here. There is no population beyond this. It's a destination on its own, and there is no supportive retail at the current time of any nature, of any size. It may develop over time, but certainly it's been on its own there for some time. So if you go there, you're going there for one reason. And again, our indication with regard to the location is that it's certainly significantly less successful than their Regent location, and one would assume Waverly and or Kenaston with the developments that have occurred there. Page number 10, automotive industry overview. Again, very briefly. This is something I've already spoken to, and there's some addendum material regarding this. There's a significant change occurring in the auto sales industry. With a lot of uncertainty and revision, we have the rise of online shopping, giving consumers easier access to information and comparison shopping, driving more competition for the consumer and lowering price margins. Indeed, there's many changes in that fashion happening. We have online shopping also leading to automotive brands considering choosing to consolidate dealerships into what they're calling distribution centers. So larger and less sales-oriented than standard dealerships as they exist today. Reducing the number of automotive dealers per auto brand in the marketplace. Additionally, Amazon is now coming into the automotive sales market in Europe, and they are indeed looking at the North American market very heavily and looking at their move into that. There are others of that nature that are doing the same thing, and there's a dramatic shift underway with regard to the automotive industry. This leads to lower pricing, faster product delivery, etc. So there is less need in the marketplace for automotive dealerships. People generally do not like going to dealerships. I have some text on this in the addenda. Their preference and ease now, they can look online, do all of their comparison shopping, look at the different models and what features they want. And if there was a distribution center available, they could go there and just, we've ordered this car, this is the one we want. They can go and see it, obviously, but there is less demand and less need for the actual bricks and mortar these days. So that is all the background for all the properties. Let's move into the valuation itself. I agree with the city in that there are very, if any, exceptionally few actual leases for automotive dealerships in the city. So what you need to do is look at alternatives that allow you to frame appropriate rental rates for the subject property and make appropriate decisions in arriving at rental rates. So what we've done on page 12 is give you, 12 and 13 is give you a significant number of automotive retail rents. You can see the locations of the properties in the left-hand column and their size, obviously the tenancy and or use, age of the structure, term, start date, and our net rental rate, obviously on the right-hand side. One I would point you with to start with is number 8, 231 Oak Point Highway. This is a former Harley-Davidson dealership, New Line Harley-Davidson dealership on Point West. Just under 15,000 square feet, built in 1990. It's no longer Harley, and they have leased it out to a used car dealer for $7 per square foot in that location. Now, it's somewhat peripheral in the city, as the subject is. I would argue it's an inferior location to the subject, certainly, and the unit size is obviously smaller. So that would be an inferior comparable, but it is indeed a similar property, similar use, and was a dealership of a type at that time. Looking at, we have, and that's a misprint there, it should be 3680 Portage. Area is probably also somewhat wrong in that we weren't able to determine the size of the mezzanine, but 7,200 square feet, built in 1988, 2017 lease at $12.50 a square foot. Again, there is mezzanine there, so that would drop somewhat. Now, that's a used car dealer. It's an inferior building, but it is in very close proximity to the subject on West Portage. It's not Pembina, obviously. The other properties that we're presenting here are by and large service centers, and throughout the city you can see the size of those. The point of presenting these is that with an auto dealer you have the sales and office component, which is in your 30 to 40% range typically, and then you have the service area at the back of the building, which is the larger component of it. So we're presenting these automotive service leases for comparability for that reason. So if you go through them, we have significant locations on Portage Avenue, 3570 Portage, just under 10,000 square feet, 2014 lease at $10 a square foot. We have properties on Nairn, 208 St. Anne's, etc. Let's move forward to the next page. Our range of rental rates here is from the roughly $6.50 a square foot range up to that high of $12.50 a square foot at 3680 Portage, which is actually lower than that. One includes the mezzanine space that is not included. So that's the overall range. Now, most of these are smaller, so they're going to drive generally higher rental rate based on the size of the property itself, leasable area. Subject property, we are looking at an overall size of 24,000 square feet, significant area of service, so the rental rate on that will be towards the lower end of the scale here. The other aspect of auto dealers is that front showroom retail office component. So we've also presented leases with regard to that in what we feel would be either comparable or superior areas in relatively new properties. So if we look at our first comparable there, 400 Fort White Way, this is, if you go down McGilvery, just past the Costco, there's a development just beyond that, beyond the rail tracks, etc., called 400 Fort White Way. It's modern flex, warehouse, office, retail. They have Enns Brothers in there for just over 11,000 square feet, built in 2012. Lease rate of $11 a square foot as of the valuation date. Now that may obviously increase as they renew somewhat, but that is their starting point. Obviously half the size of the subject. Then we have more retail use in the same development. This is Sky Zone, again built in 2012. start date of 2013 with a rent just under $12 a square foot for 25,000 square feet. Sky Zone just went dark just in fall time there sometime. It's no longer a viable business and is no longer operating there. But that particular location, somewhat peripheral, modern flex warehouse, newly constructed, good design, etc. That's the rent that they were achieving. 996 Lorimer is in that area just to the east of IKEA there. Again, modern flex warehouse, built in 2008, 2016 lease. Just over 5,000 square feet to Dynasty Bathrooms for $13.10 a square foot. This is 2016 lease as shown. Excellent development there. 1310 is what we're looking at. 1290 Kenniston. There was an industrial property just north of where the Mercedes dealership is on Kenniston that was purchased and redeveloped and turned into a multi-tenant situation with a nicer straight front presence and investment into the units themselves for the tenancies. We have a lease there after a 2015 reno to TransCanada Brewing of 15,000 square feet, 2016 lease at $12 a square foot. Lux Barbecue, same location, 2016 lease, $12.50 a square foot. These are premier locations right on Kenniston, high visibility. You may have even been there, I'm not entirely sure, but this is the type of product that we would see being comparable to the front end of what we look at in a dealership, and that's why we're presenting them. You can go down through the list. I think those are pretty good indicators of the upper end of what one would pay for the component of an automobile dealership that represents the showroom, retail, office section. The remainder of them are there for you to review as you wish. Again, more in Nature Parkway, South Landing, etc. Pardon me. The zoning agreement, caveat as noted, restricts the use to automotive itself. I've already talked about peripheral location, size, location, the restrictions on development, etc. Clustering of auto dealers there, obviously being somewhat of a benefit. We feel that a rental rate of $11.50 net per square foot on an overall basis for the entire property is an appropriate rental rate for the subject. The Board of Revision, and I know your feelings on this, but the Board of Revision's decision in the 2016 cycle was based on our valuation at $10.50 a square foot. And we have the 2018 appeal under appeal at the Municipal Board. So we've used a rent of $11.50 a square foot. Moving on to vacancy, I've already spoken with regard to the vacancy issues with automotive dealerships. It's not that there's no vacancy out there or no current vacancy. You have to look at it over the time horizon of the property and whether there will or has been vacancy. So we look at it in comparison to both industrial and retail. Industrial vacancy investment overall is in that 7.3% range, both point in time and 5-year average. Retail is at 5.9% overall at 2017 year end for the Johnson reports. We've applied 5% as the vacancy rate to the subject property, and I believe this is in keeping with the past practice of the city as well. Expense allowance, let's move quickly through this. I know that you've heard this numerous times from me, but it will get questioned, so let's run very quickly through it. Obviously, City of Winnipeg has presented the 5% management allowance in all of their prior cycles. It was termed here today that it was a management fee that was being allowed for. It's very clear that under standard lease terms in our market and in most markets, property management has always been a recoverable expense. This is nothing new, and the original intent of that 5% allowance was for the management of the property by the owner, in that it accounted for the non-recoverable expenses that they had to incur that could not be recovered under standard lease terms. So
We will go over this quickly, though.
yeah, well, let's run through it. I'm going to skip through the calculations, as we all know how that's done. Pointing out the fact that the theory behind this is well-known, well-studied, and well-presented. It's not just on the appraisal side, but on the assessment side as well. If you get into the IAAO, materials there for you to review. Looking at the expenses themselves that need to be accounted for, we itemized them on page number 15. There are many of them. We can have any discussion you wish regarding those, but I will move forward. We, at Stevenson Advisors, once this became an issue in June, once we were reviewing properties, we did our own study over the summertime period, looking at properties where you had full access to the income expense for those properties, and looking at what was the non-recoverable expense percentage as in relation to the effective gross income. So these are properties that we had, again, full access to, identified only the items that should be considered non-recoverable, and went through them. The information is there for you. Non-recoverable expenses without tenant improvements averaged over 3 years 11.5, including tenant improvements averaged 12.7. We had between 45 and 53 properties in the study. We're not asking today for 11.5 or 12.7%. We're simply asking for the reinstitution of the original 5% non-recoverable fee, in addition to the 2% and the shortfall. The actual shortfall for the subject is higher than the normal allowance. We're not asking for that. We simply use the $6 a square foot. Moving on to the non-recoverables. As was mentioned in the original hearing, there was a study done by Dillon Consultants doing a 75-year calculation with regard to costs of the infrastructure to the condominium corporation, that being both in terms of annual maintenance and long-term repair. So they're looking at present valuing that cost over the long term, and deciding what the actual costs for that maintenance would be. There's, again, significant text here. I don't want to run through it significant in any detail unless you wish me to. This has been well established. The theory is what we're looking at here. It has nothing specifically to do with the point in time in which a board order came out, and or what the market was doing then, or what the values were at that time. It's the theory that we're looking at, and that is the crucial thing that needs to be examined. So again, the point being, you locate here, you have these additional costs. You locate on Portage Avenue or Pembina or wherever, you do not have these additional costs as an occupant or an owner. So what the non-recoverable breaks down into, again, is two phases. You have annual maintenance costs, those costs that involve the annual maintenance of it, so your plowing, your patching of the street, things of that nature, replacing the light bulbs, your normal things that one would have to do. The second component is the long-term infrastructure replacement, so repaving the roadways, replacing the light standards, redoing water and sewage lines, etc., all of the major components. So that's your two aspects. The first part, the annual maintenance cost, comes into effect before the net operating income, and it's a deduction there. The long-term infrastructure cost is capital in nature and needs to be deducted following the derivation of the market value of the property. That follows the modeling that was used in the board order. and previously by the city in their initial treatment of these. Looking at these expenses, we don't have current expenses, unfortunately. What we have done is use the proportional share of annual maintenance costs for each individual condominium unit and attribute those to the property, as well as then their proportional share of the long-term infrastructure replacement costs. So that is the background. Crucially, as we have had decisions that have not reflected this in certain time periods, we're not alone in this particular setup. It's very rare, but there are other entities that have this same setup and where the city already allows for this infrastructure component. And specifically, I'm looking at 1301 Kenniston here, which is the main modern flex warehouse construction on the west side of Kenniston as you go north from McGilvery and south from IKEA. If you're on the west-hand side there, you have your Good Life and Tim Hortons and all of the property in behind there. That is the ownership that we're looking at, and they are entirely responsible for their infrastructure as well. And the city of Winnipeg does acknowledge that they face these additional costs, and they include it in their valuation for that particular property or those particular properties. The equity argument is very clear. We have the exact same setup. The city recognizes it in one instance, and yet they don't recognize it anymore with regard to Point West. If you flip to the very back of my brief, what we're looking at here is the 2020 City of Winnipeg valuation for 1301 Kenniston. So just as background, if you go through this, go down to the expense section, you can see non-recoverable maintenance and the amount allowed for that. And you then arrive down to your net operating income once that's been deducted. Going down further, capitalized, you get the market value, income-based value, as it's stated there. They add some additional land, and then there's the deduction of the non-recoverable infrastructure component, as you can see noted in there. This is specifically outlined in municipal board order as well, which I may have included in our addenda here. It's the same situation. The city recognizes it here. They don't recognize it at Point West. It needs to get reinstituted. Capitalization rate, page number 18. Again, no sales of dealerships where we can point to a cap rate because there are no in-place income streams on an arm's length basis. So what we're showing you very briefly is just industrial with regard to the service area and retail with regard to the front area. They're not directly comparable. All we're presenting here is that these are well-informed investors making investment decisions at these particular cap rates for these products. All investment-grade products, relatively well located. You can see the retail is in the 7 to 7.5 range overall, and industrial obviously has some variability in that 7 to 8% range as well. The subject property, well, there's a bit of text regarding Colliers and CV, which I'll ignore. Subject property is peripheral to the city. It is less productive than other areas of the city for automobile dealerships. There's less demand from tenants to locate there, as evidenced by brands leaving for other locations. Certainly, we would say that there would be an increased risk above the norm in the marketplace based on this evidence. If you look at the bottom of the page, we have used a capitalization rate of 8% to reflect this property accurately, and this gives us an income value of $2,863,497. From that, we deduct the future infrastructure costs specific to this property of $36,000, and we come to our final market value of $827,000. Beside that, we have the city's 2020 valuation, and beside that, the 2018 valuation. You can see the increase in rental rate, drop in expense allowance, and drop in cap rate over that time frame. Really, we don't see cap rates going down for dealerships. We would see them going the other direction in general. So we're still at 8%, which we were in the last cycle, and we hope that the board can see our reasoning with regard to that. The addendum materials include the income and expense, the Colliers and CBRE cap rate reports, supportive decisions with regard to the 5%, and I think we've also included the same board order as the city, and at the very back, and this is relevant, but I'm not going to get into it, we have 2 articles with regard to the future of automobile dealerships in the North American market and the changes that are coming forth, and they're essentially predicting dramatic changes and a lessening demand and need for bricks and mortar in the marketplace. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I jotted down a number of questions during the presentation, but I'm going to limit my questions considering the time. So I'm going to skip all of those pages. You indicated, Mr. Smith, if you turn to your page 12, where you show your rental comparisons, and I'm going to try to keep my questions with respect to the actual income approach. You pointed to 2 properties that you felt were comparable, 231 Oak Point and 3680 Portage Avenue, comparable number 11. And you indicated that it is the most comparable and closest in proximity, and you indicated it was inferior. And it has a lease rate of $12.50 with a 2017 start date. Yet you've used $11.50. If it's inferior to the subject, how would you have a lower rental rate than that?
So I'm happy to answer that question, but I'd just back up a little bit and say that I didn't say that it was the most comparable. What I was indicating in highlighting those is that they're automobile sales dealerships, not that they're the most comparable to the subject. So looking at the 3680 Portage Avenue, which is Portage Avenue, not Pembina.
You said Portage, didn't I?
You probably did. I'm just pointing out that we had a text error in the material. So that particular property, as noted, the area that's indicated is not correct. There is a mezzanine and it is larger, which would drive down the rental rate. The other aspect there is that the size is 7,200 square feet, which is typically going to drive a higher rental rate based on economies of scale, etc. That's what we're indicating there with that one.
Okay, and that's actually where I was going next, so I'm glad that you said that, because if you look at your next chart of showroom retail, you have 2 properties on Fort White Way, number 1 and number 2, both signed in 2012. One's 11,000 square feet and some change, one's 25,000 square feet and some change, but the 25,000 square foot one is higher than the lower one, which doesn't actually follow that logic of economies of scale, does it?
I understand the point. The development of that unit had a lot more tenant improvements that were required. There was more money put out by the ownership, which obviously drove the rental rate a bit higher.
Okay, again, number 10, again, Fort White Way, it has $11 a square foot as well for 4,000 square feet. Did that one have the same amount of things going on there too? Because that's an even smaller square footage.
It is, yes. I don't know the detail necessarily behind that one that you're speaking of there with regard to the level of TI that was put in, but typically with fitness places there's a greater degree of investment by the ownership.
And you would agree that a lot of these properties that you've labeled as showroom retail are in industrial sort of classified properties?
Industrial classified, yes, but I think it's clear that if you look at their location, say at the corner of Kenniston, right north of the Mercedes dealership, the prime visibility, etc., and 400 Fort White Way is it's a mixed-use property, modern flex warehouse. You get those retail office mixes in there essentially.
The next question, you've used a lot of industrial and retail, and you've indicated a number of times that you don't feel that retail really is comparable with the subject property. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that what I was saying is that big box retail is not a direct translation to the auto dealerships, as I think you mentioned yourself.
But when you analyzed the vacancy, you analyzed retail vacancy and leaned on the retail vacancy as reported in the Johnson report. Did you not?
Well,
Since you used 5% and you talked about the retail strip being 3.9 with an overall of 5.9?
So, again, given that we don't have any stats on auto dealerships that neither party can rely on, what I did was present both industrial and then retail. So if you look at the industrial stats, they actually are indicating a higher vacancy at 7.3. It's not specifically an industrial property, but the use is of a similar type of nature. And then we have the retail there, strip center retail vacancy at 3.9, overall retail vacancy at 5.9, and yet we asked for 5, not 5.9 or 7.3. So I think we're being relatively fair in what we're asking for.
Now, it's interesting that you indicated that the industrial was 7.3 because, and I apologize to the panel and the applicant that I didn't make copies of this to hand out as rebuttal, but I'm looking at the Johnson report for 2017 and it does not say 7.3. It says 2.8 and 3, and when you look all the way back to 2009, it actually doesn't go over 3%. So I'm just wondering how that got reconciled.
I don't have the Johnson report sitting in front of me.
I can pass this out if you'd like.
Sure.
I only have one copy, unfortunately, because I didn't.
Do you want to have a look at it?
If you want me to answer the question, I can look at it and do so. Otherwise, we can.
Why don't you just let him have a quick look at it?
It's up to the panel.
Just the commentary at the top. The retail followed what was presented, but.
So, yeah, I can actually speak to this. So, in the Johnson report, there's a number of breakdowns that are done, and I typically try and present them all. I see that I didn't do that in this one. So, there's overall vacancy for a category that industrial includes owner occupants. So your vacancy rate is obviously going to be less when you have owner occupants. They own it, they're there, they're not going to be vacant, they're present in their own building. Then they have investment vacancy, and they have single tenant investment vacancy, then they have multi-tenant investment vacancy. So what I presented here, which is not shown on this particular page, is we're looking at investment vacancy, because that's what we're dealing with. And then I had the 5-year average of investment vacancy. So that would be what the difference is between them.
Is the subject property an owner occupant?
It is an owner occupant, but we're valuing it as what the value on the marketplace would be with standard lease terms, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how it's been approached.
Moving on to your non-recoverable operating expenses, I'm not going to hand out the rebuttal, but I can if the panel and everybody wants me to. But is there not municipal board case law indicating that a number of these things that are listed, such as leasing commissions, tenant improvements, tenant inducements, and free rent, that are outlined in a number of municipal boards, that those are not considered included in non-recoverable expenses?
So I'm also in that same vein going to try and save time and point out that each of those decisions has been reviewed, and what's what the decisions are actually stating is that you are not allowed to reduce the net rental rate by a tenant improvement allowance in order to bring the rental rate down and thereby reduce the net income. It doesn't state that the non-recoverable expenses are not allowed on the other side of the ledger. Very clearly in accounting principles, if it's not permitted on one side, it has to be reflected on the other side. There's checks and balances, and that is where they come in. So you can't, and we are pretty much in agreement on this, you cannot reduce the net rental rate to make it a net effective rate, deducting the contribution of the owner through the TI, but the expenses that are incurred on the non-recoverable side need to be reflected below the line on the expense level. That's what the board orders say. I don't have them to show you, but that is what it is. And I'm not alone in this reading of it. It's been presented 7 dozen times here this fall.
I may understand that, but, looking at the rebuttal package in front of me, that in the interest of time I'm not handing out, I have quotations directly from the municipal board order, and it doesn't specifically state net rental rate. It said the board reiterates that tenant improvements, leasing commissions, and leasing incentives are not expenses which may be used to reduce income for the purposes of calculating market value. It doesn't say net rental rate. And when you're talking about expenses to reduce the income, those expenses are above where you calculate your net operating income, are they not?
Yes, and I'm, I guess, referring to it more in accounting terms. So to clarify further, the case that was put forward in those particular cases at the municipal board was such that they were looking to reduce the net rental rate by the tenant improvements, and that was what the case was. So when the order is indicating that that's not allowed, whatever the wording is, that's what's being decided, that you cannot reduce the net rental rate to a net effective rate by deducting the contribution of tenant improvements. So it's not reflective of that non-recoverable expenses should be removed.
Okay.
Or shouldn't be removed.
Moving on to your infrastructure expense, I'm a little bit confused because what you have on your page 16 doesn't actually match what you have on your income workup. So I'm just wondering if you can reconcile that for me. You indicate in the stabilized 2008 expenses are based on 3 years prior. Infrastructure costs equal to $90,000 as illustrated in the following table. In the absence of data for 2011 to 2013, considering the upward trend of expenses over the shown 4 years, we will utilize the same value for the April 1st, 2016 valuation timeframe. The resulting expense results for the subject property of $5,702. And then in the paragraph just below the chart, it says the resulting expense for the subject property equates to $22,557. So I'm just wondering where we reconcile that into what's actually on the chart on page 19, because those numbers don't actually match what's in your brief, in the narrative portion.
Okay, so I am happy to admit to a typographical error in that was probably not changed in this particular property. The figures that are shown on page number 19 are the accurate ones.
Okay.
If we go through the remainder of them, they should have been updated and will show. So that's the discrepancy there, and I do apologize for any oversight and confusion that may cause.
Now, your chart shows 2005 through 2008.
Yes.
Do you not have recent expenses? Because if you're asking us to include those as infrastructure costs for the current valuation as of the reference date, would it not be prudent to show what those actual infrastructure costs are that they're incurring?
That would be wonderful, and I would love to have presented that information, but I did not have it broken out for me in time to present for our evidence here, unfortunately. So the evidence that we have there, obviously it is going back a bit in time, but to that point, these costs will not have gone down since that time frame. So I agree with your point, it should be updated, and I wish it was, but the theory behind it is valid, and certainly the the expenses will not have gone down over time, as we don't see that.
Looking at your capitalization rate, you have two charts on page 18. You've used 8%, yet of your 10 comparables, only 2 of them are actually over 8%. Can you explain the difference between that?
Yes, and I think I did, but we can cover it again if you'd like to. The cap rates that are presented are indicative of these particular property types. They're well tenanted, etc. They're solid investments of their type. Industrial was ranging between that 7 to roughly 7.5%. We have one at 8.3%. Retail, varying in size and location. We had in that same 7 to 7.5% range. Looking at the subject category and type of property, we went through the particular risks that we're looking at with regard to this category as an investment vehicle, and certainly there are additional risks as I've itemized them that you would face for this type of property in this location with the restrictions that are present, etc., and the current auto environment, as well as what's coming around the corner. It's pretty clear that there'd be a premium applied to the capitalization rate, so we've made a half-point adjustment essentially.
Okay. And you've completely disregarded the brokerage firms of 6.5 to 7.25 and 6 to 7.25 of what they're seeing as investment-grade industrial assets?
I wouldn't say that we necessarily completely disregarded it. We presented the information that we had full access to and were able to do the detailed work on. We look at what they're presenting. Obviously, and this has been presented before the board many times, the Colliers and CBRE information is representative of essentially the peak of the market, and so they're saying the peak of the market is between 6 and 7.25%, 6.5 and 7.25%. So I think our selection is still valid.
I think those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McIntyre.
I have no questions.
Mr. Ross.
When did Honda put the addition on, do you know?
It might be detailed in my text there. I've got 99 and 2009 as the construction dates, but I know there was something a little bit more recent than that too. Unfortunately, I do not think that it shows that specific date here. So, yeah, 99 and 2009 is what I have, but there was a small addition after that.
Okay, and Birchwood and Elmingo, which are the same one and the same, they own quite a few units in here, right?
Nearly all of them.
Nearly all of them. Do they lease any of them out
No.
to anybody?
They were the developer of the auto park itself, with the intent of having all of the units, and they sold off Unit 90 to the ownership there in the very beginning.
Are there any units that are dark now? Vacant?
At the current point in time, no.
Well, say 2018?
No, not as of 2018. What I had mentioned before, though, is that we have two brands that are leaving the auto park with no imminently replaceable brand coming in and wanting space that they're currently occupying. So the buildings won't be dark, but they will be underutilized, certainly.
Will they be leased out to somebody, or will they put on the market for sale?
Well, no, their intent as an owner is not to sell their product. So where Jaguar is, it's Jaguar Land Rover, Volvo. So there's still two brands that are present in that. The other one is Toyota Lexus. So Toyota has the bigger part of that particular property.
So Toyota will just expand into the Lexus space?
I don't know, perhaps, if they have the need for it.
Have any of the other buildings, because you've discussed sort of all of them, have any of the other buildings put additions on lately? Or have any of the additions put on in the last, since, say, 2009?
Well, there have been a number of additions, yeah, and we'll probably see those as we go through here. To that point, BMW wants out. They just built their building, and BMW is making noise that they need to look at another location as
They
well.
want to be with their friends, with their Mercedes friends, and Audi friends.
So, yes, there have been additions and changes, but it's not the whole picture, certainly.
That's all my questions, thank you.
The developer of the mall and the owner of each of the units in the mall is essentially the same person. Is that correct?
It's the same principles behind it, yes.
So earlier on, when I was talking about the notion that the owner of the mall would essentially have a good hand relative to somebody wanting to come into the mall and say, you want in here, you've got to bear these infrastructure costs. We're not talking about actually two separate parties. It's really just two arms of the same party.
It is
The infrastructure cost is being borne by a subsidiary of the developer of the mall.
In all of the cases outside of Unit 90, yes, that would be the case. But to that point, and you probably obviously know this, but we're not valuing their ownership or their use. It's what is the market value of that property on the market. What would it transact for if they were to sell it?
But we're talking about whether it is legitimate to be applying the infrastructure costs in the income valuation.
Right.
And you've drawn the comparison with the property on Keniston. Is that similar, where all of the units are actually owned and operated by the developer who has put in the infrastructure?
No, certainly not. It's tenanted with arm's length tenants that are in place and paying whatever they're paying. But that is it's not addressing the point that we are looking at the theory. So what our task is obviously is to arrive at market value based on all of the definitions of that. The normal points exposed on the market for X amount of time. Arm's
No,
length,
my question is,
so
should that be applied
absolutely.
equally, whether it is an owner-occupied space or leased space?
Yes,
at arm's
because,
length?
sorry, and I'm very sorry to interrupt. I'm overstepping my bounds, I see that. Absolutely, because if you don't, then you are treating whether the property is owner-occupied or tenanted, and you're valuing them in a different manner, which is not consistent with market value. We're valuing the property exclusive of the use or who owns that, or whether it's owner occupied or tenanted, right? We're looking at what is the market value of that. So it doesn't matter that the owner of the property and the owner of the dealership in it are one and the same. It matters what that would lease for on the marketplace, what the costs would be, what the vacancy would be, and what it would capitalize at in a normal circumstance. That's what's being valued today.
And your assumption is that in valuing it, one has to assume that it is an arm's length person.
Correct.
Who could be coming in and purchasing that unit.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Got one question about your charts, page 12, 13. You selected a rental rate of $11.50. Is that the mean in each of these charts, or was the mean actually something different?
No, it's not. It's not the mean, and we don't specifically rely on the mean, as there's various comparability between between comparables that are shown, and particularly when you don't have the same exact property category of use, I don't think that the mean would be useful. So it's a professional judgment based on the material that's presented.
Though the city did present it in their tables. Do you happen to have those figures?
I don't, and again, we don't have dealerships that we're comparing them to here, so it's not that we have a coffee shop that we're comparing to the coffee shops, so I don't know that the mean
Okay.
would be informative.
That's all my questions.
Mr. Chairman, I just have like a redirect based on your line of questioning,
Okay.
if that's permitted.
Quite fine, yes.
It relates to 1301 Keniston, and there's been a lot of talk about how they should be treated the same. One thing I noticed during the conversation, I'm reading the title of this, and it says Revised 2020 Workup, Flex Warehouse After Receiving Financial Statements. So this I read, our department made some sort of revision based on receiving current financial statements. Whereas when I'm looking in your brief, Mr. Smith, the most recent financial information you have on infrastructure costs is 2008. So my question is, if you've been dealing with these properties every cycle, and you've been the agent on this for a number of years, why do you not have that information available to you if you're going to be requesting that as a reduction? How can we make a decision of real value and cost if those aren't presented to us?
As I'd already clarified, I would like to have that information available and to present to the board, and it would certainly be useful to have such. However, that doesn't invalidate either the theory or the methodology behind this, as well as the well-documented decisions that have come out on it. And with regard to the chart or the page that you're referring to there, it wasn't that there was additional information provided regarding the non-recoverables where they then included them. It was always included. This was just an adjustment of whatever they adjusted, but it wasn't that they then decided to include the non-recoverables. They were always present. And to that end, if I could, and I don't want to do this, but we need to, I have the decisions with regard to 1301 Keniston and all of the material that went into it that I would like to pass out as rebuttal. We don't need to discuss it, but it should be present for the file.
Is it rebuttal with respect?
It's rebuttal with respect to what you were just asking.
I didn't present any information on 1301 Keniston other than my questioning of Mr. Smith's information. So essentially he's providing additional information to the information he already has.
It's up to the panel what you decide to do with
That's
that.
just my
If you want the full background with regard to 1301 Keniston, there it is.
It's time for us to take a short break anyway. We'll begin it with a recess to consider this question. All right, we will resume after our short recess. We will accept the handout and we will give it the weight that we think is required.
Okay, and as mentioned, I don't intend to speak to it, but all of the information is there with regard to the municipal board decision and the reasoning behind it and the information presented on the non-recoverable expenses that they face at 1301 Keniston that are similar to the subject. End of story.
Okay, for the infrastructure.
For the infrastructure, yes. Sorry, I did not use infrastructure, yes.
Very good.
Is this going to be for every file?
Yeah, and you'll need some more of them, I imagine.
I can use
You can have ours.
You can have mine back too.
4, 5.
Or 6, I guess, unless Lindsay, or I guess Lindsay
She'll
needs
probably
hers.
want to purchase.
All right. So I finished my questions. I think that draws us to a conclusion here, does it not? Or do we have any more rebuttals? Rebuttals of rebuttals? No. Can we move along?
Can I ask one question, Mr. Butler? Is that
Sure.
allowed? It was handed out.
That just
Go ahead.
That just means I need to ask another question if you ask a question.
No, it's just a very easy question. These are all old municipal board orders. I don't see anything recent past 2007.
It's all the theory behind it. It has nothing to do with the age of it or any of the market data. It's the theory behind the inclusion of them. That's it.
That's my question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Lovely. So now, we have raced through docket item number 2. We will move on with Unit 50 at 3965 Portage Avenue.
Okay, Unit 50. We're looking at file number 19950. Roll number is 075690333600. And just as a preamble, I agree with Mr. Smith that all of our discussions on the previous property be carried forward, all questions and answers, and I hope the panel is happy with that as well.
I think we can accept that.
Perfect. So the address is 50-3965 Portage Avenue. I'm requesting to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $4,811,000. This is a complete auto dealer located in the Point West Auto Mall. We have an actual year built that ranges from 2001 to 2012, and that is also the effective year built. We have a leasable area of 27,414 square feet. On page 3, you'll see our retail comparables as previously discussed. On page 4, this is our income workup for the subject property with a leasable area of 27,414 square feet with a 2% vacancy, 2% non-recoverable expenses, $6 shortfall, $7.15% cap rate for a value of $4,811,000. We've discussed everything else. That's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have no questions.
I have no questions.
Mr. Voss?
So am I to conclude that there was an addition put on in 2012?
I would assume that between 2001 and 2012, there could have been 1 to multiple additions, but there was definitely an addition in 2012.
Okay, and that's all my questions.
And just to make sure that I know, your sale comparables are all the same as the previous?
Sale comparables and rental comparables.
All the same. In that case, I have no questions. Mr. Smith?
Thank you. So the addition was, I don't have the data in front of me, but as I recall, it was built in 2012. And it was expansion of the infinity portion, as you can see on the front of my document there. So that's what you're looking at. The property itself, Unit 50, 3965 Portage. We're looking at another Birchwood property, obviously, under the El Mingo ownership. It is Nissan and Infinity at this location. The detail regarding the assessment history is on page 1 for you, as well as additional detail. Again, we're looking at a low land to plan area ratio under 4:1, 27,414 square feet. The photographs of the property are there for you on pages 2 and 3. I'm not sure why they didn't include the service area, but it's very standard. Our lease comparables, similar to this, they are exactly the same, shown on pages 11 and 12. All of the other data essentially remains the same. We have a property of 27,414 square feet here, significant sized dealership. And our rental rate, in coinciding with our other property that we just dealt with of a similar size, is $11.50 a square foot. We've included the annual infrastructure costs as well as the deduction of the future infrastructure costs in our valuation as a standard with all of these. Used a cap rate of 8%, and we come to a market value of $3,285,000. And I'm happy to answer questions.
I have no questions.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
Mr. Voss?
I have a question about the land-to-building ratio.
Yes.
You had said it's not that good, I forget your exact words, but something like that. But they put an addition on here, so like if it wasn't,
I know.
originally if it was, it would have been a little bit bigger, and
So,
it's
happy
hard
to
for me
answer
to
it.
figure that one out.
I do like answering questions, so I can be informative. So, the thing that doesn't always get accounted for with auto dealers is that brands drive them. If Infinity says expand your footprint to this size in this configuration with this look, or you're no longer an Infinity dealer, that's what you do, or you're no longer an Infinity dealer. And so they hold the upper hand in the negotiation. It's really not a negotiation, it's a directive, and they do what they're told. So yes, they would have had more space originally. In fact, I think in this case, it was a portion of a separate lot that got expanded onto from both directions. In any case, they have to do it, or else they're no longer in that business with that brand. So you now have less land at under 4-1.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just to clarify on this one and all the remainder, is there any discrepancy on square footage at all?
I don't believe so.
No.
We can look at it, but I don't think so.
The first one was the only one I had an opportunity to check the discrepancies of whether there was or not, so I don't know.
I don't believe there is.
All right. Then that deals with Unit 50. We'll proceed to Unit 20.
We're looking at file number 19-951, roll number 07569033300. This is a complete auto dealer with an actual and effective year built of 1999. We have a leasable area of 9,113 square feet, which Mr. Smith agrees with. On page 3, same retail comparables and auto comparables that were previously discussed on the first property. Page 4, we have a leasable area of 9,113 square feet with a rent of $14.31 a square foot, 2% vacancy, 2% non-recoverable expenses, $6 shortfall, 7.15% cap rate for a value of $1,736,000. And again, on page 9, those are the same sales that were previously discussed. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
I have no questions.
Questions by the panel?
I have no questions.
No questions, thank you.
Just for me to clarify, which dealership is this?
This is the GMC dealer.
GMC.
I think it's the truck shop that Mr. Smith spoke of
Oh,
before.
right, okay. All right. Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you. So yes, it is the truck store at Point West. GMC being the main brand that they have there, but it's all trucks. Instead of repurposing that building, it was formerly the Saturn dealership. Saturn went out of business, and they repurposed the building to be utilized as a truck center. So looking at my page number 1, yes, we're in agreement on the size, 9,113 square feet. There's a mezzanine space in this building that is essentially holding up the hot water tank, and that's really it. It's not a useful space at all. We've had it toured, inspected, etc. So it is excluded from the space here. I note that it's there, but it's not part of the square footage, and the city's in agreement. The background with regard to the deal history is there for you to see. Again, you can see the regular nature of it. Built in 2000, we're only looking at 9,113 square feet, which is what Saturn was a relatively new and small company that was expanding. They didn't build big buildings, and it does not meet today's standards in any way in terms of size for a full dealership, auto dealership. There's no real way that the retail and office component and a service component could be fit into a building of this size. So it would either be a used auto center, or in this case, they made use of it just to sell trucks from a variety of brands, mainly GMC. And I think there's a wash bay at the back, if I recall, for this one. It's not a service center, essentially. So it's undersized for the current market. Now, we could look at that as being, in effect, it wouldn't have the draw that other larger, more standard properties for today's day and age would have. I'm not doing that. We are applying a higher rental rate to it because it is smaller. I don't know that that's necessarily would bear out in the marketplace, but we're assigning a rental rate of $12.50 a square foot to it based on the size of it. The economies of scale obviously come into play, so it may be that they would achieve a higher rental rate. So what we've done in our valuations, as you'll see as we go forward, is assign the larger dealers a rental rate based on $11.50, and generally they're significantly larger, and the smaller ones a rental rate of $12.50. This is a step up from where we were in the last cycle and the cycles before that, and it follows a regular pattern. So we're increasing the rental rate over time. So if you look at my page 18, this is all summarized, $12.50 a square foot. The other parameters remain the same. We include the infrastructure costs. Capitalizing it at 8%, we get a rounded market value of $1,153,000. And I'm open for questions.
Questions?
I have no questions, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No?
I have no questions.
No questions.
No questions. Thank you very much. That was Unit 20, then we move on to Unit 40.
Unit 40-3965 Portage Avenue, file number 19-961, roll number 07569135000. This is a complete auto deal in the Point West Auto Mall, and I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $5,026,000. This is the Birchwood Chevrolet Buick GMC dealer. We have a leasable area of 29,060 square feet, which I believe we're in agreement with the applicant. If you turn to page 4 of my brief, you'll see the income valuation summary. We have 29,060 square feet. We have $13 as the modeled rental rate, 2% vacancy, 2% non-recoverable expenses, $6 shortfall, 7.15% cap rate for a value of $5,026,000. Again, we've gone through all of the evidence in our brief previously, so pending any questions, that's my presentation.
Questions?
I have no questions.
Questions?
I have no questions.
No questions.
Your rent is 13 on this one. What was it on Unit 20?
What was it on Unit 20?
Yes.
Right, movement?
Sorry, it's just noting it here, and this one made me think that I did not write down what it was on the previous.
Unit 20 was 9,113 square feet at $14.31.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith.
Yes, so Unit 40 is the Birchwood Chevrolet Buick GMC dealership. If you look at my page number 1, you see the background on the property. We have 4.7 acres. This is a bit of a larger site, 7.05 to 1. The area of the building, 29,060 square feet. There was an addition in 2013, again driven by one of the brands, and expansion was needed. The reason that the land to plan area ratio is 7.05 to 1 here is that there was formerly an additional lot that was never constructed upon, and when they did the expansion of this particular property, they had to expand onto that lot. There was a division of that land between Unit 40 and the adjacent property, so the size of this one grew in terms of the land area. So it's 7.05 to 1. The appeal history is there for you to see. Obviously, we're looking at a 25% increase in value. You don't see that over the appealed 2018 assessment, which is at the municipal board. Photos are there for you to look at regarding the subject property between pages 2 and 4. The rental rates, again, we're looking at a 29,000 square foot building here, dealership. The rental rate that we have applied to the larger properties here is $11.50 a square foot. If you look at my page 13, you can see that the decision in 2016 was at $10.50 a square foot. It's regular steps between 2016 and here. Is it going to grow $1 over that time frame? That's probably appropriate. Beyond that, I wouldn't see. And our summary of market value is on page number 19, using the 1150 and the leasable area of 29,060, including the infrastructure costs capped at 8, gives us our market value of $3,662,000.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
No questions.
No questions?
No questions. No questions. Moving on.
Unit 10.
We're looking at file number 19-954, roll number 07569033200. This is address 10-3965 Portage Avenue. I'm recommending to maintain a 2020 assessed value of $4,015,000. This is the Volvo, Land Rover, and Jaguar dealership at the Point West Auto Mall. We have an actual and effective year build of 2004 to 2008, indicating that there was an addition done in 2008. We have a leasable area of 19,359 square feet, which is not on Mr. Smith's front page, so I can't tell you quickly if he agrees with it or not.
Can I stop you there?
Ooh.
Leasable area on page 1 is 19,259. Leasable area on page 5 is 17,111.
Interesting.
Oh.
We are not relying on the 19,359.
There's a Tim Hortons, there's a Tim's. That's what the difference is.
Oh, that is why. Look at
Here there's
that.
It's the one on number 1 highway.
Yeah.
It's part of that site.
It's right on.
Oh, it's part of the site.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get through my brief and we'll notice that when we get
I
there.
was wondering about Tim Hortons inside a dealership. That didn't make a lot of sense.
Interesting. Well, when we turn to page 5, we have the complete vehicle dealership at 17,111 square feet with a rental rate of $13.90 a square foot. We have 2% vacancy, 2% non-recoverable expenses, a shortfall of $6, 7.15% cap rate for the vehicle dealership portion of $3,166,000. If you turn to page 6, we have an income stream for the restaurant, as previously stated, of the Tim Hortons, with a leasable area of 2,248 square feet, with a rental rate of $25.45. We have a 3% vacancy, we have 2% non-recoverable expenses, a $7.50 shortfall, and a 6.35% cap rate for an estimated value of $849,000. We have our summary of both income streams on page 7. We have a potential rent on this whole property of $295,055. We have a blended 2% non-recoverable expenses on this. We have a blended shortfall of $6.03 and a blended cap rate of $6.98% for a total estimated market value of $4,015,000. Those are all modeled parameters, and that is my presentation.
I have no questions.
No questions.
Without questions.
So your vacancy on The dealership is 2%, vacancy is 3% on the Tim Hortons.
Correct.
Shortfall differs. These are all standard model for fast food restaurant, is it?
This would be standard model parameters for the property type class of the RST restaurant.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you, that's all. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. So Unit 10 is both the dealership and the Tim Hortons. We're not disputing the valuation of the Tim Hortons at $849,000. We simply add it to our overall value for the property. This particular unit is the Volvo Land Rover Jaguar dealership. As I mentioned earlier today, Jaguar will be vacating this location and building another facility in southwest Winnipeg, which will leave a gap in this particular property. Moving on to my page number 1. The past assessment history is there for you to see. We have a site area of 3.9 acres. That includes the Tim Hortons area abutting Portage Avenue. There's no actual direct frontage on Portage, as there's a considerable setback there. The remainder of the information I'm not going to run through. Property built in 2002 with an addition in 2008. Photos are there for you to see. The size of the subject property at 17,000 square feet. We have assigned the higher rental rate of $12.50 a square foot based on the size of the property, economies of scale, driving a slightly higher rental rate, as is typical in the city's model as well. City being at $13.90 here. If you look at my page number 12, you can see that the 2016 realty decision was based on $11.50 a square foot. We're now at $12.50 4 years later. It's a pretty standard increase with regard to rental rate over that span of time of, say, 4 years. Our summary of value is on page number 18. We treated it the same as all the rest. $12.50 rental rate, inclusion of the infrastructure costs and obviously the non-recoverable costs of 5%, capped at 8%, gives us a rounded value of $2,148,000 for the dealership, to which we add the $849,000 for the quick-serve restaurant, giving us a total value of $2,997,000.
Questions?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Panel members?
No questions.
No questions. That was Unit 10. We're now on to Unit 100.
We're looking at file number 19-956, roll number 07569-033-900. The address is 100-3965 Portage Avenue, and I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $5,221,000. This is the Birchwood Kia West Auto Dealership at the Point West Auto Mall with an actual and effective year built of 2000. We have a leasable area of 30,144 square feet, which is in agreement between the applicant and the City of Winnipeg. The income valuation summary is on page 4, with a leasable area stated of 30,144 square feet for a rental rate of $13.02 a square foot, with a vacancy of 2%, a non-recoverable expense of 2%, a shortfall of $6, a cap rate of 7.15% for a value of $5,221,000. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I I have no questions.
That's probably why she's happy.
No questions.
Just a short question. Are all the cap rates 7.15? I think they've all been the same so far.
I can't speak for the next briefs because I have not looked at them. I'm going to assume they are, but until we get to them, I can't answer that. But so far, yes.
Okay, just in case. That's all my questions.
But we have had a little variation on the rent.
The rental rates do, and our rental rates always sort of change with age and size of the property, which I did state, I think, in my first presentation.
Right. Mr. Smith.
All right, so we're dealing with Unit 13965 Portage Avenue. This is Birchwood Key West location, formerly a different brand. This was one of the units where the original brand was downsized, and they could only keep one of within the park. They could only have one of the same brand. This one lost the dealership, and they put Kia in place. Not immediately, but they did put Kia in place as a brand for this facility. Page number 1 gives you the background for the property. You can see the appeal history. We are looking again at a 25% increase in assessment. We don't see that in the marketplace, and that's from the 2018 assessment that is under appeal to the Uni Board. Our size is a little over 30,000 square feet. This one does have a larger size site and a land plan area ratio of 8.3 to 1. If you look at the photos, you can see the interior here. Kia hasn't gone to the same extent in their upgrades for these properties, so it's a little more original than some of the other brands that order their specific branding and look, both on the interior and exterior. If you look at the top of page 4, you can see the more original nature of the interior with the same tile and flooring. Anyway, minor detail other than to say it's not as updated as you would see, say, the Infinity or something of that nature. Let's move quickly on from there. With regard to evaluation for the subject, again, we're following a standard methodology for all of these. We're looking at a 30,000 square foot leasable area for the subject property. We've applied $11.50 a square foot for the subject, included the 5% non-recoverable allowance in addition to the 2% other allowance added in the infrastructure costs and the deduction of infrastructure costs from the capitalized value. And using the 8% cap, we come to a market value of $3,534,000. And if you flip back to my page number 1, you can see the logical progression in that value with the prior decisions. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Questions?
1.
Oh. Those are pinky squirrels?
I believe so.
I have to, just because there's a lot of touching on these things as we very quickly go through, so I had to say something because we have gone through a number quite fast. You indicate that this property is not as renovated, it's much newer and not as nice as the Infinity dealership, but you've still used $11.50 and an 8% cap rate on it?
I did, and we're not making minor, I guess, distinctions with regard to build out. We're looking at location, size, age in general. Yes, it's not quite as nice, and we've applied the same rental rate. You're correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Panel members?
No, thank you.
Sorry, but that raises a question in my mind. When I think of recently built dealerships in Winnipeg,
Yes.
the high-end ones come to mind.
Yes.
You know, 3 stories of glass and huge places and that sort of thing. Have there been recent construction of dealerships that are not luxury brands?
Generally, no, because they're in place in the marketplace. There have been renovations to those, as you'll see with some of these. Some of them have had additions put on, et cetera, right? To existing buildings where they needed additional floor space and they needed their new look for that particular brand. I want to say there hasn't been one, but I cannot think of one off the top of my head that would be a GMC or a Toyota.
How about the Toyota on Regent that Jim Patterson bought? Did
Well,
they rebuild that?
that
Did
is
they
true.
reno or
You know what?
rebuild it?
You're right.
They
I
built
think
behind.
So they took that old building out of there, I think.
they did actually, you're right. I'm sorry, they did rebuild on that site.
But generally speaking, the ones that are not luxury brands, although if you wanted to think of them as looking a little bit tired, that's relatively typical for that niche in the market. It's just those real high-end ones that are looking so incredibly glitzy.
Well, so Toyota isn't a high-end dealer, but if you go and look at the Toyota dealership at Point West, it's nicer than the Kia one. I'm not going to make the distinction that one should be significantly different than the other, but I'm just pointing out that this one hasn't been renovated to the same extent.
All right. That is number 100 then.
And I'll perhaps comment less on the others.
Unit number 70.
We're looking at file number 19-960, roll number 0756903440. This is unit 70-3965 Portage Avenue, and I'm recommending to maintain the assessed value of $5,787,000. This is the Toyota dealership at the Point West Auto Mall. This is a complete car dealership with an actual and effective year built of 2005. We have 32,903 square feet, which is in agreement with the applicant in the city of Winnipeg. If you turn to page 4 of my brief, you'll see the leasable area and the income valuation summary is 32,903 square feet with a rental rate of $13.22 a square foot with a 2% vacancy, 2% non-recoverable expenses, a $6 shortfall, and a cap rate of 7.15% for an overall value of $5,787,000. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
No, I have no questions.
No questions.
The rental rate, 1322, and that's this is a big building, 32,000, but it seems the rental rates are as high or higher than the other ones have been.
I can't speak to it, it's the model, that's just the modeled rental rate, and
This
it
shows
hasn't been touched.
being built in 2005, would that change the rents from 1999?
Our rental rates typically are based on size and age of the property, based on how it comes out on the model. I can't speak to that.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
And I have no questions. Mr. Smith.
All right, Unit 70 at Point West Auto Mall is the Birchwood Toyota and Lexus dealer. If you look at the front page there, Toyota has roughly 2/3 of the building, and then you have Lexus on the left-hand side there behind the tree. If you turn to my page number 1, again, you can see the appeal history of the subject property. We have valued the property at $3,840,000. If you look at the prior decisions, it's right in line with those regular steps. Again, we have 2018 under appeal. Subject property is nearly 33,000 square feet, 32,903. This particular one is one of the larger sites. They have 5.6 acres for this particular property. The photos are there for you to see inside, fairly wide open. Description of the property is there, and you can see the site on page 6. Flipping to page number 18, again, we have a property on the higher end of the range in terms of leasable area, 32,903 square feet. We've applied a rental rate of $11.50. We have included the 5% non-recoverable allowance in addition to the 2% structural allowance, and we've included the infrastructure annual costs and the future infrastructure replacement costs in our valuation, in line with the modeling for this and for the comparable property on Keniston. So our final market value using a cap rate of 8% is $3,840,000.
No questions, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Panel members?
No question.
Not to me, thank you.
No questions. Bringing us down to minute 45.
We're looking at file number 19-962, roll number 07569135005. I'm recommending to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $4,563,000. This is the complete auto dealer with an actual year built of 2001 to 2014 and an effective year built of 2008. We have a leasable area of 25,025 square feet, which is agreed upon between the applicant and the city of Winnipeg. If you turn to page 4 of my brief, you'll see a leasable area of 25,025 square feet, a rental rate of $13.70, 2% expenses, or 2% vacancy, 2% non-recoverable expenses, $6 shortfall, 7.15% cap rate for a value of $4,563,000. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I have no questions.
McIntyre?
No questions.
Bus.
No questions, thank you.
I have no questions. Mr. Smith.
All right, Unit 45 is two individual brands, Mini and BMW. Mini being the original, and actually BMW being the original. Mini was then included in it, and then they built a new building for BMW on the backside of the property. So that's the background of the property, with a total area of 25,025 square feet. Land to plan area ratio of 4:1. Again, certainly on the small side. You can see the recent assessment history of the subject once the new structure was in place from 2017 forward, and again, we appealed the 2018 value onto the municipal board. Photographs are there for you to see, beginning on page 2, a couple of the sales floor, exterior of the new BMW and their sales floor, and page number 6 gives you, of course, the service area. You can see the extent of it. It's relatively big and large and industrial-ish. Looking at the valuation on page number 21, again, larger property at 25,000 plus square feet. We've used the rental rate of $11.50, using the same expenses that we have discussed on all of these properties with regard to infrastructure and non-recoverable. Cap rate of 8%, and this gives us our final market value of $3,030,000. And I'm open for questions.
I only have one question, it's just informational. It's not,
Uh-oh.
just,
Can I go back and think of a question now too?
Fair, fair.
this was previously 2 units, correct, that were combined into 1? Am I correct on that?
Not exactly. So BMW was the original dealership. They put Mini in there with them in the original structure, and then the recent structure that they built was for BMW, which was on the back side of the site.
It wasn't 2 units? I could have sworn I did the replot on this one years ago. That's the only reason why I asked, just because I recall putting the new construction on. And that's why it was for informational purposes. But thank you, that's all.
Yeah.
You have it as a single roll entry.
Yeah, no, I was just asking if it was previously 2 rolls, because I had thought that it was, so I was just asking, just for my own personal knowledge. but I'm good with the answers, so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, does anybody want to do a summary?
I have a question.
Oh,
Finish.
I'm sorry.
Short question, does BMW own the Mini? Same company, they make the Mini?
I don't believe so, no, there's been some conglomeration in the dealership brands, but I do not believe that Mini is owned by BMW. I don't think that's the case.
That's all my questions, thanks.
Well, that was an informational question. as well,
Yes,
wasn't it?
yes. All questions are
It
information.
was a fun, splashy brand when it came out, and this is where they had room to put them.
Summaries.
I think we covered everything pretty good. I'm happy to not give one, but if Mr. Smith wants to, I'm sure we both can put together a summary for you.
As long as the panel takes, as you will, obviously take everything that's been presented into account, including the detail that we haven't gone through to any extent in the addenda, etc. I have some articles there. I'm happy to not give a summary. I think it's been well explained and lots of questions answered.
And we appreciate your figuring out an expeditious way to plow through the remainder of these after our thorough beginning. Thank you very much. This draws our session to a close, save our deliberation, which will take us to midnight or so.